Transfer request, anyone know the deal on that?
Yeah, I talked to them about it.
Okay. All right, well, we're opening the Littleton Finance Committee meeting for April 16th, 7 p.m. Our agenda tonight includes items such as, number one, Council of Aging Reserve Fund transfer request. And this is in no particular order, the following items. Whoever wants to go first, we have OPEB discussion. I know our treasurer, Steve Venuti, is here, as well as Chief Benefits Administrator. Ann, is that your bailiwick?
Whatever you want to call me.
Well, I wasn't sure what to call you, but I know you. So that's part of your portfolio anyway. And Espen and Linda Bordeval, that must be you back there. Right?
That's right.
Okay, great. You're our actuary who's going to kind of explain to us what the future looks like.
Crystal ball.
Okay. Then after that, also we have the town's, I guess at this point, longstanding auditor, Dick Hingston from Juicy and Hingston, to give us the audit report, or a breakdown of their audit report from the fiscal year 12, right? 2012? Yeah. Okay, terrific. If there's anything further in terms of a finance director's report, whether Bonnie Holston is back or not, we'll hear that. We'll spend some time also doing some planning for our budget presentation for the April 30th meeting, and we have at least one outstanding set of minutes to approve. We invited both the boards of selectmen and school committee, since these topics involving OPEB and the audit were topics that are kind of shared jointly. I know the two of the selectmen have conflicts. Joe Knox is meeting elsewhere in this building, I think, and Greg Champney's out of town on business. I'm not sure of the others, but we are very happy that the school committee chair, Paul Laveller, and you vice chair, Daryl? Secretary, all right, Secretary Daryl Baker are with us here tonight. Anyone else is welcome to join us. We'll start with the Council on Aging Reserve Fund transfer request. I have a good copy of that somewhere here. We do have a request, I think I forwarded it to everybody, from Pam Campbell, head of the Council on Aging Department. A request is hereby made for the transfer of funds for the following emergency or unforeseen contingency. Tita Mader, the outreach worker, was ill and absent for a period of time from sometime in March to April, and they needed Jan and Juzo to cover for her and handle the work. So this would cover the amount requested of $500 to cover pay for the fill-in work. And Alan, you had some chance to communicate with them on this?
Yes, I talked with them about it. I knew Tina was away, and she was ill in the hospital, and that work for the outreach worker was piling up. Jan Manchuso, I think, filled in last year when Tina was out and knew pretty much how to handle this stuff. So they asked her if she would jump in, and she did so. But they had
to do
no way to pay them.
Right.
You know, so I suggested that they send a request to us, and this is what they did.
Okay. And while the work is past tense, I believe they made Bonnie aware of the situation right from the start.
Yes, Bonnie was.
All right. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that situation at all out there, or do you have any questions, board members?
Just to clarify the situation, so the person that's out sick, it's not long enough to be on long-term disability or something like that, so they're getting paid their regular salary,
Yeah, she's back.
and so you just need to pay an additional person. That's why the request is there.
Yeah.
And the budget's small enough that there's no leeway.
There's
in there.
no wiggle room in there.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if there's no further discussion, then I'll entertain a motion on the request.
So moved.
Second. All right, then the motion has been made and seconded to, was that a question back there somewhere? Oh, okay. All right. I thought I saw a hand go up.
I think I was fixing my glasses.
Be
careful with the auditor.
I don't miss a thing out there.
We want the auditor.
You're raising the bid to 600.
I was afraid you had said you're doing that all wrong. I get worried with the auditors in the audience. You know? Okay. The motion's been made and seconded then to grant the reserve fund transfer request from the Council on Aging for purposes of paying for a period of time for help to cover an employee who was out ill and absent from work. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. I think we all have to sign this. If I give this to either you, Ann, or Steve, you can get this done? Okay. Fine. All right. Is there a logic or a preference as to who we should start with? Steve, in your estimation, the OPEB discussion and Linda, or the audit discussion and Dick? Who has the farther drive home? How's that?
You guys are both pretty far.
All right, well, we'll start with the OPEB.
Do we want to
Yeah,
do
we
this
have.
on?
And I believe everybody does have a handout. We all got it in advance. We got some information from Steve in advance, but you do have a PowerPoint presentation, do you?
That's in.
This one right here. If anyone wants to follow along, everyone locate that. All right. Again, in part for our viewing audience, I guess, as much as anything, the OPEB is, let's see if I can remember what that stands for. Other than pension, employee benefits? Other post-employment benefits, right. Basically, other than pensions. And the situation is, what year, was it 2010 or 11 when the state did, is this all in your report, the description of the background? Is it, okay, all right, well now, Littleton, like a lot of all the other communities essentially in Massachusetts, has to deal with the problem of setting aside enough money to pay for all employee benefits, resulting from an audit that was done statewide.
Yeah, she's in the order.
I have my computer, but then, and a whole bundle. Okay, so we'll put it on, have to give me a second introduction. Oh, I don't have it on, I have it on my server, which I know I'm getting.
Yep.
We can flip it, I mean,
We
this
can
is
flip
not
this.
that bad, right? It just might not flip is.
Okay, Steve, or do you want some lights up?
Feel free to if you want, I don't think we need them.
Where?
So we'll just kind of.
Just not sure if the TV would have come.
Oh, that's true.
Probably comes in better dark. You want to give it a, see how that looks?
That should be fine.
Yeah, fine for us.
Okay. Yeah, because I'd rather stand actually.
Okay.
I'll kind of park right here.
You can do that.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me here tonight to go over the OPEB valuation. Just to give you a little timing perspective, these results here are based on our July 1, 2010 valuation. GASB requires evaluation every other year, so Steve is now compiling the information for us to do the next update, which we're right in the middle really of the fiscal year that it should be done by. And it's actually best to wait closer to the end of the fiscal year that you're doing the valuation, even though it's the beginning of the fiscal year, so that you can reflect any asset contributions that you're making. So these numbers, you know, I want to say are a little bit old, if we want to call it that, but they're sort of still in effect until you do the next valuation. So that was just kind of my caveat there. So what we'll talk about today is what is GASB 45 and what is this word OPEB. It is made up of something called the substantive plan, which we'll go over a little bit. We need to, when we do an actuarial valuation, we need to make certain assumptions about future events, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Pay-as-you-go, that terminology, all that means is if a retiree is currently receiving a benefit from the town, they pay 50% and the town pays 50%, that 50% of the town cost is paid as we go. We're not putting any monies aside at this point. We are, but in terms of the term pay-as-you-go means there are no monies put aside. We're just paying benefits as they come due.
And those percentages are, for instance, it's what?
30, yeah, I know that you guys have a couple of different.
7:30.
Yeah. There are some options for pre-funding this, and we'll go over that. Controlling costs, talk a little bit about what some other people are doing and what, what you guys are doing. The Retiree Healthcare Commission, which was the OPEB commission that was sanctioned, or it was actually part of legislation from a couple of years ago, to study the spiraling cost of health insurance and how to address the Commonwealth and its municipalities, retiree and actually active healthcare costs. So I'll give you an update on where that study is, and then we can open up for questions. I don't really mind questions thrown, like if you don't understand something, best to cut me off and clarify it, because I mean, this is not that difficult, but there's a lot of terminology that sometimes takes a little while to get used to. Blink page.
I read it fine.
Yeah. What's wrong?
Says it's got 18 pages. so that's
1,000%,
Yeah,
yeah.
that might be your issue.
Oh, look at that.
Maybe not.
We need to get something in the budget for an
Probably a
ordinance.
bill we should have paid.
Don't leave me.
That's why Bonnie left.
Oh, we're gonna transcend.
Send.
There's the PowerPoint. See that on the right? There it is.
Oh, that-
Oh, look at that. Now we okay. So what is GASB 45? GASB 45 was implemented in 2006 on a varying schedule for different towns depending on their size, cities and towns. Most states, of course, and larger cities were the first implementers. You guys were in the middle, Tier 2 implementer. FY9, I believe, was the very first implemented. And what it is, it's accrual accounting, all right? In the old days, pre-GASB 45,
And that's a federal bid, right?
GASB is the Government Accounting Standards Board, and they are sort of the ones who put out the statements for GAAP accounting. The accountant probably would be a better describer of GASB, but that's pretty much,
Yeah, the standard setting board.
yeah, so they set standards on financial reporting and the like. So what we're doing is, instead of this pay-as-you-go that we were talking about before, which, whatever the town paid out in FY11 is what would go on the footnote, they are now requiring accrual accounting. And all that means is, similar to pensions, retirees, while they were actively working, are earning a benefit. They're earning the right to that benefit in the future. So accrual accounting says, well, let's not wait until they retire and we can pay them out these benefits. We're going to do that, but how are we going to recognize the cost associated with that? It really should be recognized over the employee's working lifetime. While they're providing you services, you want to be able to recognize that expense while they're working. What are we recognizing? It's this thing called OPEB, and OPEB just means pensions were the big first starter of, we did accrual accounting for pension benefits. We earned them as we worked, and then they were paid out once retired. OPEB just means all the other stuff, and it's going to include medical, health insurance premiums, dental, life insurance, vision plans, all those types of things that aren't a pension plan that's based on the retirement system formula and all that. So the O really is an other. It means all the other benefits. So Littleton does currently finance most of the benefit on a pay-as-you-go basis, but then you are making contributions to an OPEB trust, and we're going to get into that probably more, or definitely more, as we go through this, just so that you can understand what the benefits or the value is of that OPEB trust. One of the things that's very important to understand is the GASB. They cannot and they do not ever sort of have any types of laws or rules on financing these benefits, all right, or funding or pre-funding them. It's just how to report them. It's how to create the financial statements and the acceptable accounting practices.
Whether we fund them or not, does anyone know, does that factor into like the bond rating at all? Is that how it is?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll talk
That's-
about those things.
That's the hammer.
All right.
All right, so there is a separation between reporting and funding that is very important to to keep in mind. Because if you are going to fund, sometimes you might not want to use these results that GASB say, this is how you have to do this actuarial valuation. Funding could be done on a different basis. Because people aren't really funding a lot at this point, this is a good starting point or a benchmark to say, you know, we can fund part of the ARC, we're probably not going to fund a lot of it. Retirement systems are now going to be subject to an updated GASB, and they said it sort of has sealed the paperwork on the divorce of funding and reporting. Retirement systems used to always say they were going to fund the ARC, which was expressed as a GASB 25 number. Now it's totally different. So, you know, again, just keep in mind, funding, very different. My first part of this talk is really going to be about reporting, what's going on in your financial statements. Okay, so as I mentioned, you are a Tier 2, they call it, Tier 2 community that has to do evaluation every other year, which means everything that's done for your valuation is good for 2 years. So 2 fiscal years, the auditor can draw on our report all of the numbers that they need for the financial statements. Valuations are sort of a self-correcting process. You know, you're going to, every other year when we're going to get new data, we're going to actually look at all of their member and employee data, your retiree data, dates of birth, dates of hire, that type of thing, what kind of plan the retirees actually are currently covered under. Because we're making certain assumptions about retirement and turnover and death for people, you know, those things don't always, they never come out to exactly the way we expect them, or that we assume them to come out. So we start over again in the following year, and we use, you know, we look at the assumptions and say, how close were we, you know, did X many people really retire or not? So GASB 45 requires us to calculate an annual required contribution. That's the expense that's going to go onto the financial statements, the notes to the financial statements. It's made up of 2 pieces. The value of the benefits earned this year. And again, that's sort of the whole premise of accrual accounting. What did every single active employee earn in this current fiscal year of employment toward a benefit that's paid? And it's, if they're going to work 30 years as a typical, you know, years of service, once upon retirement, they will have earned 1/30th of that benefit that we're going to promise them and that we're going to give them at retirement. If we look at all of those benefits that are expected to be paid in the future and all the benefits you're currently paying your retirees today, there is actually, we call them the past has not been funded. I mean, there is what's called an unfunded liability associated with these programs because they're not funded, or they're funded, you know, very small assets are invested at this point as compared to the liabilities that are associated with them. So we need to amortize part of that unfunded, or amortize the unfunded. Again, we wouldn't want to have to recognize the entire unfunded, but typical accounting rules would allow you to amortize, sort of like a mortgage, that unfunded liability over a period of time. Those are assumptions and methods that we choose to create the ARC.
And within that amortization, I mean, are there hard and fast rules of you can't go any lower than this and you have to come up this high? Or?
The maximum period that GASB allows is 30 years. You can actually amortize it just like we do our mortgages over 30 years flat. If it comes out to $2 million a year, it will be a flat $2 million. But you can also amortize it where you're going to backload. You can amortize it as an increasing payment over 30 years. And typically, public entities, usually, they want to look at cost of these types of things as a percentage of their payroll. So if their total payroll is expected to go up every year, you kind of want to say, and if these are, just throwing out this number, 10% of your payroll cost, next year you'd want that number to also be 10% of an increased payroll cost, and so on. So you can actually front load or back load it so that your contributions start a little lower and they would go up the way.
No,
so those are the rules.
These are, this is a new requirement, but the debt's been building up for years for communities. Some of this a phase-in, I assume there's a...
That's the amortization piece that you're going to, you have the whole, you know, you have all the accrued liability that has been promised from service already rendered.
Is there an expectation that a community is going to have to phase this in over time, right?
Well, it's a 30-year amortization of that unfunded. And so that's the maximum period of time that you can phase it
Linda,
in.
can you explain the open amortization period? How it's-
Yep, so GASB does allow two different kinds of amortization, and we'd all love this for our mortgage payments maybe, but there's a closed amortization, which is typical. We pay our mortgage this year, and next year there's 29 years left, and the following year there's 28 years left. There is another way that one can amortize it under GASB rules, amortize this unfunded, and that's over an open period, which means in year one you amortize over 30 years. The following year, it's still 30 years, and the following year after that, it's still 30 years. It sounds kind of quirky, but it really is not, considering governmental entities are expected to be here in, infinitum. I mean, we're not expecting this company to terminate or to go out of business.
Rolling, like, or an evergreen.
It's a good way. Yeah, it's like a rolling amortization to fund it. You never, that is not a good funding policy. That's really a reporting policy that you can calculate this unfunded amortization over pretty much a rolling. You're forever resetting that amortization period. So, think about your own mortgage payment. You're never going to get there. So you'll never, and the way, if you have an increasing payment, your unfunded is just going to keep, and you're not funding. Interest does crazy things over long periods of time, and it increases things quite a bit. So that unfunded is just going to get larger and larger and larger. Even if everyone quit and you had no more service to add, that would still keep going up because you're not paying anything off, really.
I think every municipal that I do uses the open amortization.
There's very few that do not, except maybe the ones that want to see a funding policy that, then it's a real unfunded
Conceivably, though,
amortization.
even if you didn't, you can switch to it at any time, right?
You can, yep.
Or can you?
Do you mind me jumping in?
No, not at all.
Can I just add,
Dick
the
knows
pension-
about as much as I do on
No,
the statement.
But the pension system, Middlesex County, was on a closed amortization schedule. But when the market went down, they would have had to increase the assessments so much to make up for the market that they pushed it out. They didn't say you could do it over 30 years again. I think they pushed it out 12 years.
2040, yeah.
Yeah, so they pushed it out 12 years so that somewhat opened it up again instead of keeping it closed. So.
Yeah, the retirement system operates a little bit differently. It's subject to Section 22D. They had an end date. They said, it wasn't about 30 years or any kind of years. It was by 2028 you needed to have your unfunded fully amortized. Well, as you know, 2008 happened. Markets crashed. There was some pension relief that you could go to 2030, and then there was a total pension reform that allowed them to go out to 2040. So, again, I always kind of say, well, what are you going to do when you're within 5 years of that end date? And the market did what it did in 2008. There's always, I think, going to be some kind of adjusting mechanism.
They're pretty sound, though, right? The county system.
I don't know much about Middlesex.
Our schedule right now is end in 2038, so we have a couple of years of flexibility there. But there's still some assumptions that need to be changed. The salary increase needs to come down a bit, but the discount rate also needs to come down.
Exactly,
That's-
yeah. As salaries
that's the
are
killer.
dropping,
That's-
people are saying, well, if you're not going to be paying these salary increases, you're probably not also going to get 8% return on your money. So there's been a lot of pressure to bring the discount rate. I don't know what Middlesex, are they at 8?
The discount rate is what they estimate that their investments are going to earn in their actuarial,
Still 8 is what they say?
and they're still using,
Middlesex just
Are they
lowered
eight?
it to 8 for this year.
it was 8.125 in the last valuation.
Right, and we're
And it
lowering
went
it
down
down
from
to
8 and a quarter. Still pretty
And we're
high
talking
assumption.
about bringing it down to like 7 3/4 or so.
But when they're looking at that, they're looking at it over a 25-year period.
Yeah.
So they're not thinking about what it is right now, they're thinking 25-year period.
And that's been what, supported by their experience?
Apparently, yeah, by
I think
their
all the-
actuaries' experience.
Yeah, all the systems show that over the 25-year past history, that is not technically an indicator of the future, that it is over an 8% return for all the systems combined. So again, you're looking at a 20-year-old active employee where you're investing their member contributions and contributions on their behalf from the towns and schools and everybody else. But that 20-year-old is not going to see his benefit for another possibly 40
And they're
years.
largely investing in market funds, right? So it's,
It's through the state fund. The state is controlling that.
They control the county funds now?
Mhm.
Okay. But they're still invested in the market,
Oh,
essentially.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I have a basic question, how this works in the town of Littleton and maybe elsewhere. Somebody works here for 10 years and they leave, and they retire from someplace else. Are we on the hook for their retirement, or is it only if they retire
That's
from
on my
Littleton?
slides, we'll
Okay.
talk about that. And the last thing that GASB 45 requires is just some disclosure, and you'll see that in the footnotes, the notes, sorry, not the notes of the financial statements, that there's going to be information about the benefits that you provide, if there are any plan assets and the liabilities. So we prepare what the auditor needs to put in the financial statements. So the substantive plan is just GASB 45's kind of fancy name for what is the plan, what are we valuing here, and who is eligible to get those benefits. So, you know, the town is contributing a portion of the medical and life insurance premiums for retirees. So, and again, GASB 45 is just benefits payable to retirees. Post-employment benefits, remember, was the definition of OPEB. So we do realize that for your active employees, they contribute a portion of the medical premium and the town contributes a portion. This is not that. This is once they're retired, what is the town contributing for? So currently, the plan provisions are pretty much mirror what the eligibility requirements are for the retirement system. All right, and I think Littleton also has a 10-year requirement within the town to get the benefits. So you can't sort of just say, well, I have 10 years in Westford, come here and work, and then retire after 2 years and say, oh, I'm
That's
going
a
to get
fairly
my...
recent finish though, right?
So typical Group 1, the Group 1, Group 4 terminology is retirement system terminology. You're either a Group 1 general employee, people who sit at desks, teachers, that kind of thing, and a Group 4 employee are generally your public safety type people. There are different retirement eligibility requirements for each of the groups, with the assumption that police and fire get a little bit earlier eligibility because of the nature of their jobs. So 55 with 10 years of service, you can get this benefit, or 20 years of service. Again, there's that extra caveat in Littleton where you need the 10 years here. Pension reform from a couple years ago has increased the eligibility ages for retirement benefits, so these kind of reflect off of that. So now for any April 1, 2012 and beyond, sorry, it's actually April 2nd and beyond hires, they now have to wait an additional 5 years to get the full retirement benefit. They can retire early with substantial reductions in pension, but in OPEB, there is no reduction. You're going to get whatever 50% of the premium cost is. We'll talk a little bit about that with the OPEB Commission on what some of the outcome of those discussions were. Retirees contribute 30 to 50% of the premium depending on when they are hired, and the town also provides, again, to retirees a $5,000 life insurance coverage that very modest. This is nothing. It really does not add much to the liabilities of these things, because life insurance generally never increases. If anything, as people live longer.
You have to provide, isn't it?
Say that again?
State law requirement that you have to provide life insurance.
And did you say teachers are part of this as well?
Okay, good point. Remember, retirement system, Mass State Teachers Retirement System covers all of the Commonwealth's teachers, and state pays to fund their benefits. For OPEB, the teachers who work in this school district, the town is on the hook for their medical. So when we collect the information, it's now not only general employees, police and fire, but there's also the teachers who probably are in Mass Teachers System, but are now covered under Littleton's health
But
benefit.
still under these requirements. So if they go from school district to school district, that doesn't go with them that this is how many years they taught in the state of Massachusetts. It's still...
They can still retire under these, so, and then there's another retirement, I think, eligibility for teachers, the Retirement Plus, where I think I'm not sure the eligibility changes, but there's different conditions for retirement. So they are still part of it. The retirement system is pretty universal throughout the whole Commonwealth, no matter where you work. All right, so the eligibility could be you could accumulate it from many different places, retire. But again, if Littleton has the added requirement of the 10-year
Okay,
provision, they
Or
have to
get
still
this.
be here for 10 years.
To get health benefits.
right, okay.
For the pension piece, built into your assessment, if somebody works 10 years for you and 10 years for somebody else, the Middlesex will build into your assessment only 10 years. So even if they retired from you, if they worked 19 years one place and 1 year for you, and they retired from you, your assessment will only reflect 1/20th of.
For the pension piece.
Pension.
Right, and we'll talk about how that gets applied for the retiree medical piece. Okay, so assumptions. We run evaluation, as I mentioned, we collect all the information from Steve. He gives us employee information and retiree information, all the information on your current medical plan rates and life insurance rates. And then we have to come up with some assumptions. We have to decide, one, if there were money sitting in a pot, earning investment return, and we are using that pot of money to pay these benefits, what assumptions should we use to discount the future value of money? So remember, some of these people aren't going to be collecting a medical benefit for 20 years, so it's out there, and we have to discount it back to the present. All right, so GASB says that the investment return, or the discount rate, sorry, I'm going to mix up those, discount rate is the better terminology to use, is the rate of return on the investments that are going to be used to pay those benefits. So if a town was not pre-funding at all, they're basically paying out of the general fund, and the general fund is invested in cash. So it equates to that a pay-as-you-go system is invested in cash, and that you will you need to come up with a discount rate that's close to cash. And everyone's saying, well, 4% or so does not seem like a discount rate. Maybe I shouldn't say it in front of the auditor, but the auditors really aren't kicking back too much on that level. 3.5 to 4 is what we generally see on the pay-as-you-go kind of invest on the discount rate. I called your pay-as-you-go sort of like the no pre-funding, partial pre-funding, because you do have assets in a trust. What happens when you have assets in the trust, you can now invest them, and hopefully those assets are going to earn some money, and then all of a sudden, gee, just like retirement system, part of that trust is going to be used, and the investment return is going to be used to pay some of these benefits. So it's not every dollar needs to be raised by revenue and taxes to pay the benefits. You will actually have a trust fund that earns some positive return that you can also use. When the numbers are still small as compared to the liability, we can kind of blend the rate a little bit, and that's why I kind of upticked you a little, 0.25%. The way the markets have been probably since July 2010 and interest rates, we might have to bring that down again. But we'll look at where the assets, when we collect all the information for the next go-around, we're going to look at where the assets are invested, what kind of funds are they invested in, to kind of come up with that. We also show in our report what would happen if you fully pre-funded this. In other words, you had a funding scheme, a contribution policy, and an investment policy. So you were sort of looking at this just like we look at retirement systems, that there is, statutorily, there is a funding mechanism that's in place, there's a funding schedule, and you're contributing those monies. You would hope then that, the assets are substantial, and you're going to be investing them in a variety of equities and fixed income monies with, that same discussion we just had, which is 8% reasonable? Well, it may be a little bit high at this point, but maybe it's 7.75. So full pre-funding, we will show you what these liabilities are going to be under a full pre-funding method. In liability termination, the higher the discount rate, the lower the liability. And the reason for that is the concept of, I need to deposit a pile of money today that's going to earn something to pay out some benefits in the future. You'll need less money today if your monies are going to earn 8% than if they're only going to earn 4%. So that's the concept. High discount rates mean low liabilities. The goal is to try to invest those monies into some vehicles that will earn some money for you. That's the most important assumption. The next most important assumption.
Excuse me, and those decisions are made by what? The Commissioner of Trust Funds, locally?
we actually are on the hook for making that assumption. We would talk with Steve and Bartholomew, who have the monies and the investments, and if there was an investment policy with, benchmarks on how they expect these monies to earn,
Right.
we take all that into account.
I'm asking the question, who's making the investment decisions? Is that local?
The actual investments?
Yeah,
We have an investment advisor, Bartholomew and Company.
okay,
So they're investing the funds at the town office.
all right. And that's with you primarily, you're making the decision on behalf, okay. Commissioner of Trust Funds are not involved in this at all, that's separate? Yeah.
Sorry, we make the decision on the selection of the discount rate
Okay,
with
right.
input from all of those components. So the healthcare cost trend rate's next most important. Again, we got that 20-year-old who, is going to retire 40 years from now. What is the benefit that person's going to get at age 65? Well, today's premium rates might be $700 a month. What are they going to be in, 2050? Well, they're not going to be $700 a month. I can pretty much guarantee you that. So we need to make some assumption as to how we think those medical premiums are going to increase. This is a very difficult assumption, there's a lot of surveys done, there's a lot of studies done about what's happened in the past, but to predict really how these things are going to change. So we start at 10, thinking from year 1 to year 2, they'll go up by 10. The following year we say 9. 8, 7, and we go to what's called the ultimate rate of 5%, which means way out in the future, we're anticipating 5% annual increases. Someone's going to say, that just seems totally ridiculous because, I could probably tell you in 6 or 7 years it's not going to be 5% increases. Studies have shown that if we kept 10% forever, it would take over our GDP. That medical costs would just take over everything. So it's more of a logical trending thing. And again, these are assumptions. We're trying to, come up with an estimate of what we believe the liability is for these promises, but they're never going to be exact. I mean, you're still, remember, these are liabilities. This is not the cost of the program. The cost of the program is what you write out checks. And the benefits you're providing, what do you owe? These are just assumptions, applied to the data and the premium information to get a best guesstimate of what we think the future obligations are. So those assumptions, again, 10% is probably, I don't know what the premiums are 2 years ago to 2 years from then, but we're going to look at that when we do the next report.
To that point, to our advantage, so this report that Lynn was talking about, we did 2 years ago. the 2 years that we've had in between, we had the reform, mass health reform that we took advantage of. And our increase in that year end was what, 3%? 1.5%, and then the year after was 3%, and this year was 7%? Yes. 7%. So her 1098 was 1.5%, 3%, 7%. So we'll have a little
So our
advantage.
expectation will be that what we anticipated from 7110 to 7112 is going to be much lower. We calculate an expected, and then we say, oh, but look, this is what really happened, so we have an actuarial gain. And again, it just means that now we're starting with a smaller number to project out into the future.
Can I just jump in? One of the things on our, because we present the liability on our balance sheet, and one of the things, a lot of times the liability is, what would your liability be if you ceased operations right now? Well, this isn't even that, because this is assuming that a certain number of the people that are working now are going to make it to get your, so it's really a rolling number, and there's a lot of estimates that go into it and a lot of actuarial stuff that goes into it, so that it's not a hard, you can't get to a hard and fast number. I'm sure that there would be a point you said, oh, look, if we stopped business today, what would our liability be? It would be significantly lower than what you're calculating.
But the impact, from a budgetary standpoint, can be that the 3 years' experience in the health right now might mean that the next time we revisit the 30-year number for OPEB, we could reasonably change it.
It would be lower.
It would be lower, or we could use the same amount of money to buy a bigger piece of time, right?
You could, yeah, but that, GASB still says 30 years is your maximum amortization. So if you end up with a lower unfunded, you'll just get a lower expense number. Again, this isn't really funding, you know, what Steve's or better experience has actually done on the budget side is more critical to me than
I
this.
understand, I just
Yeah.
from a practical budgeting standpoint, when we'd like to get something established in there and then have a growth rate attached to it rather than a fluctuation rate, you know, it's a lot.
And that healthcare trend rate is the toughest assumption to, because there isn't anything like that in pensions, and pension liabilities tend to be very stable. I mean, we have a lot of people, you know, on average, people are going to retire when you think they are, they're going to terminate when you think they are, and they're going to die when you think, you know what I mean? When you have big enough numbers,
Right.
assumptions, but in pensions, there are no, I mean, maybe salary increase might give you a little bit of trouble, but the healthcare cost trend rates can change things significantly, especially when people are, you know, going out shopping and looking to revise their plans. Technically, GASB says, even though you're on an every other year schedule, if you do have a significant change in your substantive plan, you really are supposed to revalue. And that, you know, that is definitely an actuarial gain. You know, if you're on a every third year, you kind of don't want to do evaluation and then have a significant plan change and not touch anything for another 3 years. So, you know, there is that recognition that there are
It
gains
would
and
almost be more
losses.
helpful to, you know, from a planning standpoint, to have a hard number you were aiming at that you had to whittle down. But I was hoping to get more definition, personally, on that after this discussion. Now it sounds like you're making it much more obvious that this is going to continue to be a moving target.
It can be, but I mean, if you come up with a funding policy, you could establish a set of parameters that.
But the gain that we're getting in this healthcare trend, if everything else was constant, and correct me if I go off target here, if everything else was constant and we still have these healthcare gains, what it does is it would decrease our annual required contribution, our ARC. I'm sure Linda would talk about that. So if that annual requirement goes down a bit, and we're continuing to fund it, plus pay the premiums for the existing retirees, we're getting closer to that ARC.
Okay. Right.
And that's what S&P, for example, they'd be ecstatic if we were contributing the ARC every year. I mean, we need a AAA.
Yeah, I'm just hoping the mechanism is there to allow you to, you know, say you take the pain, you allow yourself to build in paying at whatever schedule, then your rates improve, so theoretically you could drop those rates, but we don't want to do that, we want to maintain it at that level. Is that going to be recognized, where is that going to be recognized?
In your funding, more in your funding
Okay.
policy
I
as
think if you
opposed in
haven't
the
got there,
accounting.
Yeah.
you certainly don't want to not be there again, so you're always going to have to.
They called those the contribution holidays back in the pension day, that if you had some significant asset gains, oh, look, we don't need to make a contribution this year, so let's not.
Yeah.
But, so what ends up
Precisely
happening.
the scenario
Yeah.
I'd like to be able to avoid, plus be able to understand it in simple enough terms so that when somebody looks at your numbers and says, well, the experience was lower, arguably we should be funding that lower, you know, in the next 2-year cycle, and that money gets eaten up elsewhere, and then your, you know, rates go up
And
during that time
as Steve
period.
mentioned, you know, we're.
So there is an
we're
actual
funded
trust
this
fund
month.
we're paying this into that, so there is an actual nut somewhere that's being bought down.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, good. Well,
That's
the easiest way to.
In the financial statements from Linda's report is a number that the unfunded liability, and the unfunded liability is 32,916.
Okay.
So I think it's safe to say that if that healthcare trend rate was 5% going down, that you wouldn't have started with $32 million. You would have started with a substantially lower number,
Right.
and that you would have to start recognizing over there. And when Linda says it's not a funding, what GASB 45 is, what it really is a reporting thing. So we have to report in the financial statements that affect your net assets. We have to keep it, putting more and more of that $32 million liability in there. So if the trend, if your discount rates goes up and your healthcare trend goes down, then there's going to be less. It won't be 30 million that we'll be starting with. It'll be 28 million, and we're reporting less and less of that.
But you could come up with a funding policy that says, you know, we're going to contribute $500,000 this year, and maybe that will increase by 2% a year. You know what I'm saying? So that you still have.
Hoping to do better than that.
Yeah, or, you know, some number, that's what some towns are doing. They're saying, here's what we can afford, and we'd like to see a schedule, a funding schedule, that says, what if we increase that? Or one of the other ones I've done, we want this OPEB or the trust contribution plus what we pay for our retirees to be a certain percent of the budget, and we think our budget's going to go up by 3% a year. So what would our contribution?
Because right now, we're looking at it as a $32 million problem with a 30-year window for solving it, but theoretically, if we get a decent, program going, we can, and some, we get benefit from years like that, periodically, we can make that happen quicker.
Right.
Okay, good.
Right. And the last two assumptions that we look at, participation rate, that just means, again, we were talking about is those active employees that we think are going to retire. Well, they're going to retire or they're going to leave. But if they retire, is there a probability that they're actually going to take the insurance? Well, there are some people who don't. Somebody who might be in a town next to you who doesn't charge 50%, but might only charge 30%. So there might be some people who may not take it. It's been difficult to pinpoint that rate because it's so new. This is so new that you look at it one year and it's 85%, the following year it's 90%, and you don't really, again, want to be changing these assumptions so much. So we try to hone in on a little bit of an average on what we think people will, sort of people's behavior. What are they going to do once they retire? And spouse coverage just means once you do retire and you do elect coverage, are you also going to cover a spouse? Think about that. Different than pension. Pension guy gets his pension, he collects it, and upon his death or her death, spouse gets 2/3 of that pension. There aren't two parallel benefits being paid like in OPEB. If you choose a spouse, you're now not paying $700 a month, you're paying $1,400 a month, or whatever the premiums might be. So spouse coverage assumption is very important in these valuations because we're assuming that an active employee who does retire and elects coverage will cover a spouse. And we look at your current retirees to get a feel for that. We say, how many of these retirees do cover a spouse? So that's the basis of that assumption. Just a rundown. Retirement rates, as I was talking about this Group 1, Group 4 employees, police and fire can retire earlier. And remember again, benefit has nothing to do with service or age. All right, except at 65 you go into Medicare and then you'll get into a different plan. But the person who retires at 55 gets the same dollar amount benefit this year as the person who retires at 64. All right, so that 55-year-old is collecting that OPEB benefit for 10 years. The 64-year-old, same exact benefit for just 1 year. So when we have to distinguish by employee type because we know police and fire are going to retire earlier. Teachers do retire under different sets of assumptions as well. So when I say by employee type, there's 3: teachers, police, fire, and your general employees. Same thing with turnover. How do people leave? And generally police and fire do not. That's low turnover generally, whereas maybe your general employees may have a little bit higher turnover. And mortality, what mortality improvement means is that if I have a 90-year-old person in my valuation, retired, we expect, we have a certain assumption for his life expectancy. Well, the 20-year-old, we kind of are thinking, improvements in our own mortality. The 20-year-old is probably going to follow a different mortality pattern than that 90-year-old. So we actually, and it's not good news, it's bad because that 20-year-old we're expecting to live even longer than the current 90-year-old.
Well, that's good news.
Good or bad news, that's what you're talking about.
When it becomes personal, it doesn't matter.
We always say, what does she do for a living? We tell you when you're going to die. GASB 45, this is the last assumption that, then we'll talk about some more fun stuff. And requires us to value what's called an implicit subsidy. And what that means, it's really in group health lingo. When you submit your total enrollment information to your health care provider, to your insurance carrier, they're going to rate based on the ages and the sex of all of your employees and your pre-Medicare retirees. They're all lumped in together, all right? What ends up happening is, and again, we have to remember, going back to what GASB 45 is all about, it's retiree cost only, all right? So we're only concentrating on the expense for our retirees. When everybody is thrown into a bucket together, generally, and everyone's going to pay the same. We don't rate by age, we don't do anything. Everyone's going to pay the same. Your retired group obviously is going to be a bit older than your younger active employees. What's ending up happening is because everyone's paying the same, the actives, if they were all by themselves, would probably be paying this, and the retirees, if they were all by themselves, would probably be paying this. But they shift it and make sure that everyone pays the same dollar amount. So that's what's called the implicit subsidy, that you're actually charging the actives a little bit more in order to cover those older retirees. And these are the pre-Medicare retirees. They're all put in a plan. All right, so because we're only valuing this retiree number, we have to put what's called the implicit subsidy. So you might see in the report, gee, you know, it's $700 a month for that premium, but maybe it's really $1,000 a month because of that implicit subsidy. It's all based on ages and incident of using medical expenses. You know, a 20-year-old obviously uses a lot less medical.
So in effect, you have a separate line item appropriation for your retirees' health insurance, and you might think that that's the number, that number plus what you put in, you transfer into the trust would be what your contribution is, but it's not. It's what you paid out of the appropriation plus what Linda calculates as an implied subsidy from the health insurance that paid out of that health insurance, your other general health insurance line item. So it will be a larger number, which helps drive the OPEB cost down.
The obligation down.
The obligation down.
Yeah. You have to recognize it and calculate the liability, but as you, the net obligation that you're keeping track of every year is the difference between what you fund and what we calculate. So you want to make sure that, you know, that's why they say funding the ARC, you won't have an obligation if you keep funding the ARC. But the further away you are from that ARC, the more obligation you are creating. There's an exception for community rated plans, and an example of a community rated plan would be the GIC. There are so many people in the GIC, and most of it's state, that, you know, the town of any town who's got 40 retirees is not going to make a difference in how the GIC is going to calculate their rate. So you can actually use straight premium numbers in the GIC. In my opinion, it sort of creates unfair comparisons because you guys aren't in the GIC, so your liabilities look higher. It doesn't necessarily mean those are your cash cost liabilities because it includes this implicit subsidy. A GIC type town, you just reflect premium rates, so there is no implicit subsidy. So their liabilities always look smaller, and I always think it's sort of like sometimes an unfair comparison. But there's enough people who are on the bandwagon about trying to get everybody equalized, like the Moody's and all the bond rating agencies. They're all going to start weighing in on looking at these liabilities on an equal basis. So that's the implicit subsidy. It does come into play in the town of Littleton's calculations. This is just my favorite little picture on, it gives you a visual of what's really happening. And remember, I had that healthcare cost trend rate increases. So we're starting a little under $1 million in pay-as-you-go costs, going up for a lot of reasons. One, people are going to keep retiring. All right, so this is the closed group. This thing would end up peaking and then coming down and hitting zero at some point because our youngest employee at some point will no longer be with us. So, you know, this ends, and that's what a closed group is. It means we're not assuming new people here. So if we did assume new people, this thing would just like keep going up and up and up and up and up forever, unless we think at any point in time medical costs are going to start coming down, and we're not assuming any of that yet. So this is just kind of gives you
a level number of employees. Is that part of this or not?
So this is, okay, so today we have some retirees who are currently getting benefits. That's 2013, fiscal year 2013, so a little under $1 million are paying those people. The following year, those same people, some have died, but the cost went up, and there might be some new retirees.
Right.
The following year, same scenario goes, you know, out into the future. So retirees are aging, but their benefits are going up, and some are dying. New active employees are retiring, but it's the active employees we know about. It's not anybody we haven't hired yet.
Linda, this closed group is just the people that work here now.
Exactly.
So it's
no
not
new
counting
hires.
if somebody leaves and somebody...
Yeah, so that's what I said. Beyond
Part of the
2040,
change every 2 years will be a reflection.
this will look different when Steve gives me
recognizing
new data.
people that
Yeah,
come in.
when we get new data, this chart will look a little different, especially if he's telling me that your rates currently are lower than we expected. So it will
But
start.
spikes in
But it's
hiring can
still-
also drive it up.
Exactly, yeah. Well, not really, not yet. Those people need to retire, because this is,
Well, I
again,
know, but they
just
will drive up
Well,
the out years.
out, exactly. Yeah, so if you had all of a sudden this year added, 100 employees over what we had in the last valuation, that definitely will show a higher peaks at the end.
Can I have another basic question? I'm sorry. But somebody goes into Medicare. Now, what are we paying for them now? Is this the
Good
supplemental or
question.
something?
Good question. So if this chart was for a 60-year-old Medicare, 60-year-old retiree only, all right? We show for 5 years some increased costs, and then it bounces way down because we're going to be in now a MedX plan or a Medicare supplemental plan.
Okay.
Do you guys have a requirement? I mean, now the state in healthcare reform says you must put your Medicare eligible employees in Medicare. They must apply. If they're eligible, you got to put them in there. Before, there was no requirement, so people were happily hanging on to what I call the pre-Medicare plans. Not here, I mean, everywhere. And some towns adopted Chapter 18 and 18B of 32B that says you must move them into the Medicare plan. So now with...
We're all there.
Yeah, they're all there. So there are some people who aren't Medicare eligible. They didn't have enough quarters while they were working. So for that guy, he's gonna stay in that plan, in the pre-Medicare plan, so that would just keep going up. But the 65-year-old, as soon as they turn 65 and move into the Medicare plan, so again, Steve gives us who's in what plan, so we know. And our assumption is if everyone's got to go, that when they turn 65, they're dropping down. So cost relative though, there's a whole lot more years beyond 65 than there are between 55 and 65 generally. So it might look like it's real expensive for the pre, but the post is such a long period of time, it could actually be more expensive.
And one of the changes that we did a couple of years ago also, just before health reform, we put a policy in place that said employees hired after July 1st, 2010
Is your 30/50?
was 50/50 instead of 70/30 in retirement. So that would make those up years a little bit.
Well, some of that's
There's not enough employees right
Right.
now.
the collateral benefit of doing all this, besides the funding and the getting all the reports and so on. It just makes you have a little more discipline in terms of your policies because you're seeing what it really costs you, right?
Perfect point, because that's really what, it's all about the benefits.
Right.
It's really, this is all the reporting or a funding policy, but it really, the ultimate cost is what you're promising and what you're doing in that
And
regard.
that's a great point. It's everything that goes into the hiring decision.
Right.
It's not only the cost of today's premium, but start to look out
You gotta
for the
look at it
future
all,
and
right?
see what the cost is.
That's, when GASB implemented it, that's was their direct intention, for people to see what the costs of benefits were that they were giving to employees, because it's easy to give benefit to employees when you don't realize what the cost is. And everybody knew that what they were paying every year for health insurance, retirees' health insurance, was going up. But until people looked at it, the unfunded liability, which your unfunded liability is probably higher for retirees' health insurance than it is for pensions. That's
It is.
because they've already started funding. So that's what the intent was, to just make people know what they.
Even though I have always felt comfortable that we had a strong system in place, but to put the question out there, prior to this GASB 45, did we even have a number attached to one of our unfunded liabilities? So it forced a responsible town to go out and find out what its numbers were, never mind everybody else. Yeah. Okay, that's good.
And the private sector adopted FAS 106, which is the GASB 45 comparable many years ago. I want to say it was in the 90s.
Oh, yeah, I was doing it.
Yeah, so, corporations are already needing to recognize this liability, and it's sort of inevitable.
Right.
The governmentals are generally a little bit behind private sector, but, and Dick's right, that it really is an eye-opener I mean, people still aren't funding, and there are people who get our report and they say thank you, and they hand it to Dick, and that's that. There are others who, you know, have me come in and try to explain what it really, you know, what it means. So you guys are good. All right. Really, you know, these are numbers, and it's probably getting a little late. So these are the numbers from that July 110 valuation. Again, partial pre-funding, notice when I said lower the discount rate, higher the liability, so we got like $33 million liability versus almost 19 million. Assets are the same regardless of what you do. Assets are assets. That number has increased. Steve was telling me you guys have funded, I mean, this is, remember, two years ago, 2.5 years, almost 3. So, you know, that number is going to change in the next valuation. We calculate that unfunded. A couple pieces go into it. Now, one of the rules of thumb is that expected benefit payments, that's sort of the number. Remember I said in that picture, the chart that went like this, it was a little below $1 million. There's the $915,000. This includes the implicit subsidy, so Steve might look at that and say, we don't actually pay that every year, or we didn't. It's probably a little lower than that, but remember that includes the implicit subsidy. This is the pre-GASB 45 expense, what you paid out. Now, under GASB 45, the expense is this ARP. Notice it's $3.9 million. So there's been a lot, you know, people are saying sometimes that number is 10 times the expected benefit payments. It all depends really on your demographics of your group and obviously the benefits you're providing. So that's kind of gives you an example of how a full pre-funding versus the partial pre-funding. It's all about the discount rate. Same benefits we're valuing, but discount rates just mean how you bring in those future dollars back to the present.
In total assets right now in that little trust account, probably very close to $3 million. So that's how much we've grown in these 2 years, right? We've had this valuation.
And that's a direct dollar for dollar. We amortize for the ARP on the unfunded, so we're subtracting any assets in the trust. We are subtracting those from the actuarial accrued liability to come up with this number that we need to amortize. So if you contributed the full ARP, everything could stay the same. Because remember, interest on top of things always increases.
It's not only the town's contribution, the light department's contributing something, water department's contributing something also. So in total.
So we have money going into the trust fund now, but we're still basically paying the expenses out of the general fund every year? So this is just for at some point where we can't do that, where the number's going to get too big and we can't do it, and then we start drawing on the trust fund?
I think accounting-wise, the way I think the entries are supposed to work, and Dick can correct me again, is we should be paying the premiums out of the trust assets and then contributing the stuff in there.
Okay,
Actually,
just
that's
rather
one of the
keep
things
it
that funny,
simple.
when she took me out to talk to me, that was one of the things she wanted to talk to you about is to take the amount that you have in your appropriation for retirees' health insurance and put that right into the trust. And then when you get the bills for the health insurance, to pay it out of the trust. So I think that would help your with your funding too, because the money could get into the trust sooner. So at the beginning of the year, you get the money into the
It wouldn't
trust.
go back to free cash if it wasn't.
It would not go back to free cash. Right, and so you'd also get to invest it sooner. So, well,
What's required?
yes and no. I mean, I know Bartholomew wouldn't like that because
Enabling
that's
legislation on that, or what do we do on that? Is that,
I'm sorry.
what do we do practically to make that happen? Is that a town meeting vote?
I don't think that requires anything. You've appropriated the money
Yeah.
and
It's
you've
just
already
how
accepted
we
it.
Fund and all that stuff.
Practice.
And accounting-wise.
And that's actually total contribution. When you pay out those premiums, if you know, it looks like we recognize it as it went into the trust and then it came out. So it's part of the contribution, even though if somebody did not pre-fund, they actually are making contributions. You're making the $900,000 premium contribution. So that is part of an employer cost. Just because it's not technically going into the trust and coming back out, it's still a contribution. It's actually better for us to follow, kind of like, you know, we can look and say, oh, look, they paid out $900,000 in premium payments, but they put in $2 million. So it's sort of just like pensions work. You contribute to the trust, member and town, whatever appropriations, and they pay all pensions out of that trust. So it sort of operates the same. When you don't have a lot, sometimes, and you're just starting, and you're just setting it up, I mean, a lot of people don't do it that way. And I recommend that you do, just because I think it's cleaner. It kind of shows.
One of the things that makes it a little difficult is because when you're putting the money into, giving it to an investor, Bartholomew, they want to tie it up. They want to invest it long-term. And then if you say, well, no, because we're going to give you that much, but we're going to start taking it out and make monthly payments out of it, you know, it's not like a checkbook. It's tied up in some things. They want to tie it up in long-term investments.
And if they know that you can take the money out, they're putting it in a money market fund.
You
In
could
some
do that.
cases, I can earn more in a checking account at a local bank than they can in a money market fund. So
Right.
It has its pros and cons.
You know, you could, if you want, I mean, if you want to get the money and do it like that, I mean, you could
I
put,
can segregate it and,
yeah, call it an OPEB checking account, or whatever you want to call it.
Is there an overwhelming preference which way most communities go on that? So,
Most are doing it the other way, but I think the better way is to do it, is to move the money in sooner. I think that is the better way.
But you also make that a priority payment.
Right, right, and if the bills come in less, it stays.
You have a financial document that says we put X% in there, and that goes right off the top.
It's also a function of cash flow too.
Yeah.
You know, July 1, I can't just shove all this money out because tax payments haven't come in yet.
Right.
So it's a matter of, do we have the money to do it at that certain point in time?
I don't think all towns have Stephen Nudie running their money either, so. Right?
The Moody scheme.
The other point about the OPEB trust, it is called an irrevocable OPEB trust, and that means once it's in, there's only one purpose that you may use that money for, and that is to pay retiree medical, life, dental benefits. So once it's in, it belongs to the trust. Except I guess if the town disappeared, there has to be some way to get it out, or if you were fully funded, I don't know. They haven't gotten there yet.
Well, I mean,
Well,
you know, sometimes
employees will
that,
still be there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, sometimes people are afraid to put money into that trust because they're saying, well, what if something changes with new health care? Are we going to, is that going to be locked in there? Well, that just means that next couple of years, you just don't appropriate anything in your retiree's health insurance and
Use
pay
it.
it right out of that.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're going to not have
My
access.
bigger fear along those lines, when we first heard about this and the amount of liability, was that the state would waltz in with some sort of solution and we would be punished for being responsible, which is usually how those solutions work. And there was some talk in even December about the state addressing this issue in some
The
level.
state has opened up their pension investment people to towns that want to contribute to OPEB funds there, so they're invested just like the pension dollars are.
All right, so that hasn't changed any of these requirements,
No,
nor
the
are they
requirements are still
matching the
requirements.
cash, right?
But they do, I mean, there is a way for them to get hold of the cash. They haven't put any
Do you want to mention
hard
anything
and
about
fast
the
things on this.
legislation?
Yeah, I have a couple slides on it.
They could, that's all.
Sorry to jump.
I think that the state's going to stay as far away from the liability as possible, because they don't want to take on any of the liability. What they're doing, and Linda's going to get into, is they're trying to find ways to reduce your liability.
Right. They
But
haven't
not to-
really said much on pre-funding. They have not, there is no state mandate. They really have, I think, stayed away from
Yeah.
that only because of the times that, you know, you're going to do that and something else has to give if you're required to.
Well, they have to
pre-fund.
help fund mandates. So if they give you a mandate, they have to help fund it, so.
Really?
Unless they,
Oh, yeah?
But not fully.
unless they
Don't we wish?
also put a opt-out in the legislation.
You have an escape clause.
So this is, again, more of the GASB 45, what is actually on your financial statements. The annual OPEB costs, it's the ARC that we've calculated with all this information that we've been talking about. Everything in actuarial science gets interest thrown on it for the following year because this, you know, the time value of money, things have changed. And then there's an adjustment, and it is more complicated than it's worth getting into because it's really that if you haven't funded the ARC, we thought you would, and if you don't adjust it, it looks like you're double. You're going to kind of get double. So that's a good thing because it's a subtraction. But at the end of the day, what we're looking at is this net OPEB obligation.
Can I just
Alright.
throw out some
And-
numbers, because I got them here?
And that's the liability.
Yeah.
That's Hopefully you have 6.77
Well, I'm
million
looking
as
at
of June
2012.
11.
so-
Okay, yeah, you picked
so-
up the next number.
Yeah, so 2012, the annual required contribution was $4,000,001. And then those interest on the net OPEB obligation was $287,000 plus. And then the adjustment is a $403,000 down the other way. So the net OPEB obligation is $3,998,000.
That's a huge swing
Wait,
from this.
that's the annual OPEB cost, you mean?
I'm sorry, the annual OPEB cost, yeah.
Because that 6.77 unfortunately goes up. As you don't fund your, if you funded your
Yeah.
ARC, or if you're funding everything, you're not creating new liabilities because you're on their schedule. You're on the.
We're
the
underfunding it, but we're
You're
funding.
under, so as you underfund, you're creating a balance sheet item, but it's not really on the balance sheet yet, I mean.
So the net OPEB obligation, the annual OPEB cost was
Yeah,
$3,998,000. And you had the estimated employer cost for just cash outlays was $817,000. The implicit subsidy was about $160,000, and then you transferred $775,000 into the trust, above and beyond what you were required to, or what you did paid out on a cash pay-as-you-go. So your liability went up $2.2 million last in 2012.
So that 6.7 million gets added to the 2.2,
Right.
you said?
Yes.
So now
Yes.
we're at, 8.99, 9 million, as of June 30, 2012. If your funding policy, gets closer to funding that ARC, those increases in your NOO decrease. So communities who, and I don't know of one, I'm not sure I know of one who's actually funded the ARC, they would have a zero net OPEB obligation if every year they funded the ARC. I don't even think Wellesley did.
You know what? I have a couple, and I think for the school, but the only ones I know that are fully funding their ARC are the ones that have regional school districts, because they don't have the teachers and involved in it, and that they have so few employees that they can actually afford to fund the ARC. Now, if the regional school systems wanted to do it too, which would be great, but they couldn't afford to increase their assessments a lot. And it's sheer numbers. That's all it is, the numbers of people.
You'll see like light departments.
Yes. Right.
These separate utilities that
Water
are
department
funding,
districts.
yeah, the light and water districts tend to have, you'll see that you have a town and then a little bit of assets and you say, what are these? And it's only for the light department, so you kind of have to sort of segregate them out. And we'll keep track of assets, as Steve mentioned, each of the enterprise units, if you will, in that.
But Linda, wouldn't you say they're doing better than most? Yeah. I mean,
Oh,
they're
yeah,
way,
yeah.
much better
I
than.
did some research after your request that you thought, we're going to talk about who's funding and who's not. There's not good news out there. I could not find,
Right.
a lot of
No, you guys are
information.
way ahead of the
Yeah.
curve on this.
Yeah.
I mean,
All right. So here's some, the funding options. You're either,
So what are those towns thinking, the ones that aren't funding it? They're counting on a white knight to come in at some point, right?
well, it's continually pay as you go, pay as you go, pay as you go.
They're
So
all
it's
going to
pushing-
retire, it's going to be somebody else's problem.
SEP.
It's kicking the can, so to speak,
Yeah.
it's waiting.
And
And-
each year, we talk with S&P, and it's more and more of the first thing they want to talk about.
that's right.
And for those towns that aren't taking care of this, it's going to be reflected in
So
the
that's when they're
budget.
gonna get hurt first.
When this first happened, I was at meetings and Moody's and Standard & Poor's were saying, well, we're not going to do anything with this liability. We always knew it was out there and there was a big liability out there, but we just didn't know how much. But it's not a big surprise to us. But as places, I have places that are the small places that are funding the whole thing. I have other ones that are doing absolutely nothing. And then I have other ones like you that are putting a good chunk in. And as time goes on, if you were a AA community and the person next to you is a AA community and you're funding, eventually your net assets are going to keep growing and growing, and theirs are going to keep getting worse and worse. So just by comparison, they both can't be the same anymore. So they're not going to bump you up, but they're certainly going to drop the other ones down, because your liability is going to grow, but you're not going to look the same anymore. And you guys are funding it, and it makes you, Moody's, the more you fund it, and the others aren't, you'll look better by comparison.
Well, the last bond rating we got, they mentioned that as,
Oh, yeah?
as a attaboy.
Yep.
This is why it's where it is,
Yep.
because,
If you read the very last paragraph of
Right.
that report, it says that you're gonna be where you are for at least the next 2 years. And one of the conditions of that is because you're not funding the ARC.
right.
And they want to see us get to that.
Of course,
That's
by being
something-
responsible here, we don't have any money to borrow for other projects to take advantage of those wonderful rates we would be getting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that discussion, full pre-funding is pretty much, and again, I would caution the use of this GASB 45 actuarial evaluation as some, it's the Bible of pre-funding the full ARC. Because there's a lot of assumptions. The implicit subsidy, I would not be in favor of fully pre-funding. If you were at some point of your assets are now getting close, there's got to be a point where you're not going to want to fund this implicit subsidy because you're never going to be paying it out. All right, so, I think for now, any funding schedule that could be derived from the report is valuable. I mean, you're not close to the ARC, so you have some, you're using some discretion on how far away you want to be or what you actually can afford to put in. So the full pre-funding, as I mentioned, allows the use of a higher discount rate depending on the investment policy. Think about the way pensions are invested. I mean, they're somewhere between 50 and 100% funded. They're still using somewhere between 7 and 8% investment returns on their monies for valuing the pension liabilities. So that's, there's significant assets that have been accumulated in pensions. On the OPEB side, that is just not the case. So there are very few communities, even the state, they have some, I believe they fund the proceeds from the tobacco settlement cases. That's their funding policy at this point. I know that what it was, and I want to say that, that's still their case. So they use what's called a blended rate at the state, and that's kind of what we're doing here. I mean, the weighting towards there's more of your liability that's not funded than is, so we really need to weight more significantly on our discount rate toward the unfunded piece. So partially pre-funded, we can ratchet it up a little bit from what we think will be a strictly pay-as-you-go. Again, the lion's share of the communities are not doing anything, so they're the pay-as-you-go, and we just have to look at rates close to the return on cash, which is probably like 0.1, but if we did that, these liabilities would even be bigger than everyone's reported.
Is there anything they could do to increase the discount rate? I mean, is if they had the money in the
Pre-funding.
state, if they had the money in the state fund?
And that might,
they can
I don't know
invest-
about the state on how that would work in trying to get the monies out monthly. And that would
Right.
be the issue. You'd almost have to budget, hold back. And I'm not sure if it has to be separate.
It
But
is.
are they investing it?
They can
Is there
invest
enough
in realty
money?
trusts.
But is there enough money at this point in their OPEB trust
There's-
to,
Oh, they
no,
commingle.
in the whole states? You know what I mean?
commingle.
Are they,
Yeah, they're yeah.
so is there, with retirement?
Yeah.
But I mean, they still, accounting-wise, I think they have to
Accounting-wise,
keep
they
it
keep it separate.
separate.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean.
So
is
that is an investment policy, in my opinion.
Is the
And
health, what is it?
it's the healthcare,
Trust board,
HCST
trust
or
advisory
something like
board, yeah,
that,
something
yeah.
like that. I'm not saying you're doing it, but I was just curious, would
Yeah.
that be,
I mean, it does Bartholomew. I presume they have an investment policy
Oh,
and
we have
some,
an
and all of that. So with, we can look at it and say, equities. But again,
Haven't I given you that?
I looked at the folder and last year's stuff is
Yeah,
all
we
in there.
An
But
OPEB policy.
But remember that the amount of assets that are there for, that are part of the liability that's funded versus not funding is significantly skewed. So you still have to kind of say most of it is under the unfunded column. And that's what the state does. They do a little bit of prorating between the two.
Here's the real interesting stuff next, right? Controlling costs.
Yeah, okay. So this kind of gives you just some stuff, the irrevocable trust. Pay as you go, there is none because there's no trust. Nobody's funding anything beyond what you owe every month. And if you're going to, any funding, if you want to recognize those assets for under GASB 45, you must have an irrevocable OPEB trust. And you guys do, so that's either column, the middle one or the right one. The ramification on the bond rating, all right, it's still kind of unclear currently. I mean, we're seeing some states that have their bond ratings dropped because of some massive pension liabilities that they're not facing. We won't mention it's one in the Midwest that starts with an I, but so those ratings are dropping for some of these state systems. Communities say to me, I need this report ASAP because this department's going out for a bond. So they're asking the questions, and I think they want to see these liabilities. Whether or not they're going to take action now, or as Dick was saying, in the future, there's going to be, some up here and some way down here. So, again, that's why I wrote potential. Logically, it would seem yes, but we don't know for sure. And if you're fully pre-funding, they're looking, I think, at what are you doing toward addressing this liability? Are you doing anything? And I think just doing things is giving you the positive, check on that side. So those are your funding options that you can deal with.
If they ask you if you're doing anything, one of the things that you absolutely did is change it to 50/50. That's
Controlling costs.
That means more to them than putting $300,000 or $500,000 in, because that will be a bigger impact long term.
It all comes down to the benefits. You still have to pay for, if you don't do anything with controlling the costs, then they're still going to go up. So a few little bullet items here. OPEB reform, there's some legislation pending that was submitted in February, I believe. I'm going to get a little bit more into the details of that in a couple slides. Some things that helped a little bit, I'm going to say real little. Pension reform, you're saying, well, how does pension reform affect OPEB? It did change minimum retirement ages for pretty much all employees for post-April 1, 2012 hires. So let's think about that. How many 2012 hires are about to retire? Probably not many. So the true cost savings for those things is really going to take a long time to see. And that's what I was saying. Your delaying retirements are going to reduce costs, because now that 55-year-old who was going to retire and get 10 years worth of pre-Medicare coverage now has to wait till 60, is only 5 years. Obviously a cost savings. But the other thing too is that 55-year-old, you don't have to replace him with another employee till he's 60, so you got 5 more years of a fewer person. One of the things that you start noticing in some of these things is I call them positions, that you may have a person who's in a particular job and there's a retiree who's maybe in his 60s, but then there could be another retiree who had that same job. Now with people living longer, there could be 3 people that are still on the rolls who you're providing benefits for. In like my grandparents' day, people retired and they probably collected a benefit maybe for a year or 2, and that was it. So when you talk about employment strategies or whatever, those are things to think about, that you could have a lot of people sort of hanging on within one position. So delayed retirements kind of helps that a little bit. But again, changes that impact future hires only take years to be meaningful, and that was what pension reform, they only changed, well, they had some other changes for current employees. It's very difficult because a lot of especially the retirement benefits are all contractual, so it's hard to make changes to current, people have already been hired. So they came in with, let's make changes for future hires, but again, you're not going to see those cost savings for many, many years. So that can help in OPEB, even though, because you're delaying retirement, so it does help a little bit in the cost.
If this is a given, like even for us, like the policemen and firemen hiring now would have to wait till they're 60 to retire? This is a law now? Okay.
Pre-funding in an irrevocable trust, it doesn't really control the costs, but it makes the liabilities look a lot less, because again, you're using trust fund, hopefully investment return. And so cost, not really a savings, but you're able to use some of that investment return from your OPEB trust to pay the benefits. So instead of every dollar of benefit being raised by taxes and revenue through taxes, you at least can invest some monies and contribute from the trust.
And so practical budgetary matter, dollars spent here are being spent on new hires. Real impact there.
Right. Yeah. Municipal healthcare reform, last year, I believe, was that 2012? I think it was 2012 or somewhere. So that was what I was talking about before. It requires your Medicare eligible retirees to enroll in Medicare supplemental plans. In the old days, it didn't. That can drive these costs up outrageously. So that's a good thing. I think, you know, if you're eligible for Medicare, you should apply for Medicare and be covered by Medicare. And then the plans that supplement Medicare are a lot less expensive. We kind of touched on this a little, and I said I would be talking about it. What Dick mentioned about in retirement, if somebody shows up with 19 years under their belt and they show up at Littleton and then work for 1 year and then go retire, you say, oh my God, why'd I hire that person? But you'd only, for retirement purposes, be on the hook for 1/20th of the benefit. Under OPEB, it's a little trickier, and let's sort of forget about the 10-year requirement for a minute. You sort of have to bill the town that the person came from or had prior service in. This has caused a lot of stress, I think, amongst people because there's like a deadline for billing, and it can be kind of confusing. And I think people are saying it wasn't clear if a town, if you are charging your employee 30%, but another town is 50%, can you get back, you know, the 70? I mean, it's
So it does say that
it's the
lower
lowest,
rate.
right? It's the
So,
lower
yeah.
rate, but there's some other issues that have come up, and I think the proposal, the legislation that's pending, has some clarifying language for this thing. But you can, you know, in as much as you can send a bill out to the town next door to recoup costs from a person's prior service there, you could get bills from other towns where people have left here, gone somewhere else, retired from there, and had service here. So,
I believe you already have, right, Steve?
yeah. So we look at that as it's probably going to be a wash. There's only one situation I have where it's a new regional school district that has pretty much the entire workforce has service everywhere, you know, somewhere else in 2 different towns. But it's going to be very hard for us to even know, and it's only on a year-by-year basis. So it's going to kind of be hard to figure out unless it's like part of the data. But for active employees, we could never guess at where people are going to go. So we kind of look at it as it's a wash, that whatever you get for a bill, you can send out a bill. So this is just, the Retiree Healthcare Commission was put into place about a year ago, I think. And there's a lot of good information if anyone interested. If you just Google Massachusetts Retiree or OPEB Healthcare Commission, they have a whole website with all the presentations that were given regarding health costs. Given, you know, Mass Taxpayers Foundation was doing some stuff, Mass Municipal Association. They hired some actuarial, you know, larger actuarial firms to do some estimates of costs for the state and calculated estimates for municipals. So this is what they were charged to do, to kind of come up and say, okay, we know there's a problem, how are we going to address it? And they put a report together that's also on the website that was actually pretty much mirrored in the legislation that Governor Patrick filed. So just some of the key points on the Healthcare Commission, you know, they came up with, there are things like that state and local unfunded liability is about $46 billion in Massachusetts. Obviously, that's a problem. It is greater than the pension liability, and it's really it's the nature of the fact that there just is not a lot of pre-funding. Apparently, that spending for retiree health benefits in the Commonwealth is like over $1 billion a year at this point. So it's significant dollars are being spent. They're reporting that about $50 to $75 million have been pre-funded, and that was, they were looking at it, just a small group of the 25 largest municipalities in the state. So, you know, you're looking at, we got $46 billion, but we have $50 to $75 million pre-funded. And the state has about $400 million in their OPEB trust. That was separate from the state. In 2001, 13% of budgets were being spent on healthcare, and that has now risen in 2010 to 20%. So they're saying, they basically came up with all the reasons why, you know, something has to be done. This is not going to, you know, this isn't going down anytime soon. And, you know, one of the biggest issues was that nobody really is pre-funding, but this commission At the end of the day, the legislation doesn't have anything to do with pre-funding. It's really about what they're going to do with the benefits themselves. So a couple of the things that, so they had a final report that was published in January, and the legislation was filed in February. So anyone who follows the House bills, here it is, House Bill 59, the recommendation is that you would increase the minimum eligibility age by 5 years. So remember, that could be different depending on when you were hired. So a Group 1 employee who could have retired at age 60 will now retire at 55, Group 1 employees who could retire at 55 can now retire at 60. There were some grandfathering, but this is applying to people who currently work. And that's because the OPEB benefits are not contractual like pension benefits. So we're increasing eligibility age, increasing eligibility service. Remember, for a Group 1 employee, it was 55 and 10. Now you're going to say you need 20 years to get this benefit. And by the way, if you only have 20 years, the most that your municipality is going to pay is 50%. But if you have 30 years, we'll pay 80%, so prorating. All right, that's more than you're contributing at this point. I'm not sure what they would say in other words, you only have a 70 as a cap,
I
right?
think
As a
there's
cap.
something in there.
So that says if you're
capped.
already there, you're okay with the cap. This is a big departure from where benefits are, and I think this was one of the complaints. Somebody who would go and work at a municipality for 10 years gets the same benefit as somebody there, a career employee who was there for 30 to 40 years. So this really addressed that, this prorating of the benefits. And as I mentioned, certain employees and retirees are all grandfathered. Pretty much every retiree is grandfathered. If you're in now, if you're retired, what you're getting is going to be what you'll get.
I believe that it's, if you're there for 20 years,
Yep,
then they'll only get 50% of your 70%. So I think that's.
Say that again.
So you're paying 70%. So if somebody's there for 20 years, they'll only get 50% of that 70%.
So these are
No, I
percentages
think
of the
50%
benefit.
is-
The cap.
It's
I would-
50%.
Are you ready
Of-
about
And
it?
then there's
Of the
phasing
maximum
in
allow, of the
between
maximum
20 and
benefit.
30 years, it's between 50 and 70.
Of the maximum benefit. Of the maximum benefit, that's what the language says, I believe. It says you get 50% of the maximum benefit.
Offered
What do
by
you have to do to get
Offered by-
100%?
What's that?
What do you have to do to get 100%?
You can't get 100%.
I think that 80% is the maximum that anybody can offer.
80% of your 70% of the 50%?
No, you can get
No, it's not
100%.
gonna
30,
be 100%.
my understanding is,
When you retire.
say if you're a 70% community, that after 20 years, they get 50% of your 70%. After 23 years, it goes up to 100%. You know, it phases into 100% of your 70%. That's my understanding of it.
There's other people who are grandfathered, like if you have 20 years and you're within 5 years of pension eligibility, you're sort of under the old requirements. If you're within 5 years of medical eligibility and you have 9 or more years as of 7/1/2013. So all this, this is coming down fast because I think they want this in place soon.
July 1st, right?
Yeah, so they're actually putting July 1, 2013 as some of these as of
maybe.
dates. It's legislators, so it's in there.
I can imagine there would be pushback as there was on the pension.
There's been a lot of lobbying, I think, against what's going on. So,
This is like an
so, I mean,
actuarial playground here,
this is
right?
the kind of thing that is changing costs, right? It's going to impact the cost of things. And so that's all the good news on OPEB.
See, Daryl, you thought school policy could be dry.
No, I got
Sure, yeah. You didn't have to wait either, Darryl.
No, you have to make the whole presentation, right? Now, so what would be useful in terms of trying to sort of see to me, there's 3 elements of the healthcare costs there. There's the current amount you receive for contributions and you pay. There's the amount of the retirees that you're paying. And then what's the set aside for the current employees for your future liability on those? So to me, those 3 elements there would be a little easier to track how much our current employees cost, how much do we need to be setting aside for them, and then what's our unfunded liability of all the ones that we're still
Isn't that
paying
your arc?
for.
Isn't that the ARC, annual contribution?
Are you talking about the current premiums you're paying for your active
As
employees?
we talk about the amount of money that we want to set aside for healthcare benefits,
That's the ARC.
That's the ARC.
That's the ARC, annual
Yeah.
retired
The
contribution.
ARC-
Contribution, which is.
The ARC is made up of, I would say, like 4 parts. There's what you pay out on a cash basis, just to fund for what you're gonna get for bills for retirees' health insurance. Then there's the unfunded liability for those people, for retirees. So they worked, the problem is there's no match. Like if somebody works, is collecting Social Security, there's an employer's share and an employee's share. Up until now, there was no employer's share. So somebody would work for 30 years and then they'd retire, and then all of a sudden you'd get a retiree's health insurance bill, and then the town would start paying their share of it. So
That's not what we're doing anymore.
that's not what you're doing, you're funding some of it. So I think that in the ARC, there's 4 parts. There's what you have to pay out because of the bill that you're gonna get for retirees' health insurance. And then there's an unfunded liability for all those retirees. Then there's an amount that you should be putting in for current employees, and then there's the unfunded liability for current employees. Is that fair?
Yep.
So it's 4 parts in the annual required contribution. So are you saying it would be better for you to see what makes up those 4 parts?
there's a lot floating through here, and I can track most of it, but I'm also thinking about the people that can't track all of this too,
Yeah.
in terms of a crisp way of breaking down how much we're paying out of current contributions the employees actually make. There's the contributions the town makes as part of our benefits match. Then there's a part that we are paying because we didn't pay into a trust
Right.
fund there, which we have to pay every year. Then there's the unfunded liability part that we're trying to work its way out, and then there's the part we're not working on that there. And graphically, that could be very powerful to
Yeah.
show people where these costs are coming from and where you're eating them out of there, in terms of trying to explain how you're trying to eat into that, because trying to tell people you're eating into $30 million, which you don't know is really going to be $30 million, it might be $20 million if we get this assumption over here, doesn't come across crisply in a presentation to a
You're right.
bulk
Okay,
audience.
that's in large measure, I mean, a couple of things prompt why we're here tonight for this, getting more of an education on it. The GASB 45 kind of has driven the self-awareness of it, and then so has the just sheer size of the problem, but we haven't given prominence to that whole issue in numbers or presentation, as you just kind of alluded to, in our financial reports. I think we need to do that more and more, so we need to, make it more prominently available on the website, anything else we're publishing, but also doing it in such a way that people can understand. So, I don't know how I think we're going to defer to Steve and Bonnie about how best to, show that, but if you have any suggestions, I mean, we have all the numbers, obviously, it's buried
I'm
in the
just thinking
reports.
of ways that, because graphically,
Yeah.
you had that one chart that showed a lot there, and, and as we talk about what we're actually paying for, so that we can show that as our costs are going up, this other piece is going up here, and how are we gonna make progress on it? At which points do you make policy decisions about how far you're going into it? And then what, I think Paul used the phrase to me there, the opportunity costs that you're gonna lose as you go against those too, because those become, I think, play into, not your part of it, but the town policy
Right, the
part of
whole
it, in
policy
terms
stuff,
of
yeah.
what are we doing, or what are we not doing as a result of that, and how are we managing that overall liability?
I'll tell you, it's kind of serendipitous that one of our later, everything's later agenda items is the budget presentation plan. We'll do our little spiel for the public here on April 30th, and, I think it's a subject that has not stood on its own in terms of a presentation, so maybe we'll consider making that part of our presentation, just an OPEB bullet, or page rather, chart and bullets.
Because then as it relates to the policy part, and the particular part there is which part of our current employees and the direct recognition of the ignoring for a moment the voluntary contributions to the OPEB part of it there. We have current employees on board, and what is our policy about paying their future liabilities?
Right.
And that can be a lot more crisp in terms of also talking about the cost of hiring an employee or a cost of replacing an employee.
This is part of what you want to cover in the joint policy discussions, correct?
Oh, I don't know that we had a
Some of that?
specific item on that, and I'm sure it'll factor in only because it's, you know, it's long-term planning. We have policies in place, frankly. So I guess to the extent that we're reviewing current policies, yes. I think we feel that we've kind of addressed it. We have a policy approach in place. But it's in place, and I think it's fair to say that a small subset of all the players actually understood what was going on. So since the rest of us all need to understand it,
I was talking about the group you want to put
I understand
together.
that. So in the context, it's not one of those items that doesn't have a policy yet. We have a subcommittee about, you know, various financial policies that, you know, we want to create. And but it's certainly one of the ones that exists that, you know, that we have, that we need to take a look at, make sure we understand. And who knows, maybe there's some change appropriate for it. Do you have something in mind along those lines, or just?
Darrell will help with all the policy you want.
All right.
Breaking it to your point, Darrell, on the last report, I have it here. So out of the 33.8 million in accrued liability that we had from the last report, almost 21 million was for active employees and 12.8 was for retirees.
That's good.
And we break down the premiums, so we know how much we're paying for current employees premium-wise and retiree-wise. So it all comes into the,
What report is that from, Steve? Is that just from the,
that's the actual,
I have one town that has started, they haven't done much funding, but what they're starting to do is, for every employee that they hire, they're putting a piece of money into a OPEB trust fund. Like, that's part of the appropriation for each new employee. So, I mean,
So whereas
It's not
part
easy,
of that would
with
be
the
is
wheel of
at town meeting, when you present the OPEB part of it there, if that was two parts. One is policy-wise, the mandatory contribution for our current employees, and then the piece that's going to eat away at the
Right.
existing retirees unfunded piece. It becomes a little bit more clear what we're talking about there.
Thanks.
Because it becomes hard to disagree with funding your current employees' liability, which is
Right.
something I think we need to be very conscious about.
well, that's, as I said, that's one of the items we're talking about. I talk about it in terms of the April 30th, because prior to the town meeting, we do a similar session. We started to do it live video last year. But it's almost a dry run for town meeting, so we'll definitely make one of our, we would choose probably 5 topics to talk about. One is, general policy activity over the past year. One is the budget and warrant articles, and we try to highlight a couple of key issues. This is certainly one that's appropriate time to address with a graph and bullets, and we'll keep you in the dialogue on that. Some of the handouts, I see Steve just gave you some of that. We do have extras on.
Or just email it to me. It'd be
Okay, yeah,
easier.
we have that too. All right.
And then feel free to come to one of my policy meetings for school committee.
I was gonna make a requirement.
This is the advanced class. Now we move to the audit. I don't know, Dick, whether you have a.
I'll have a quick, I didn't prepare it because I just didn't want to go through each
Yeah,
financial
we have your
statement.
report, although we didn't get the hard copy till today, although we did get
I thought you had a PDF of it. so.
got it digitally at the end of last week, and I printed up what I think is the management letter. But if you want to, highlight from that or wherever you want to.
Well, I was just going to talk about the financial statements and a kind of an overview. If anybody has any questions, also just ask them anytime. The first things that Moody's or a reader, most readers do when they're looking at the financial statements is they go to the opinion letter. And they, a reader just would look normally at paragraph 3. Paragraph 3 is usually the opinion paragraph, unless there's a qualification. So you have a small qualification, and it's because the light department operates under the Department of Telecommunications.
It's paragraph
and Energy.
4 on ours, right?
Yeah, so it's paragraph 4 in yours. So when they look at it, they first take a look at it and they say, oh, light department, and it's no problem, and especially because your light department is very healthy financially. So when they look at it, they want to make sure that the financial statements can be relied upon. So Since GASB 34, so, and you do have a clean opinion except for the minor qualification for the Department of Telecommunications and Energy. The financial statements are in, since GASB 34, are in two sets of financial statements. There's something called the government-wide financial statements, and that's the statement of net assets and the statement of activities. And that's on a full accrual basis of accounting, and they include long-term debt and capital assets. The fund financial statements are broken down by governmental funds and enterprise funds and fiduciary funds, and they're on more of a modified accrual, almost the basis of accounting that you're used to getting reports from. The governmental funds are your general funds, special revenue funds, which are your grant, your capital projects, and your permanent trust funds, which are the trust funds that benefit the town. It's like if there's a scholarship fund that you can't buy something for the town, that's considered a fiduciary fund, and it goes in another set of financial statements in the back. And then you have your enterprise fund, your water and your and your light department. The ambulance fund, I think, was an enterprise, and now it's back to being a special revenue fund. Your fund balances is what they look at. I saw in your policies that you're very concerned with your fund balances, and that's important. I think that when Moody's, one of their favorite things is policies, as long as they're adhered to. If they can rely on policies over a number of years, then that's what they love. If the second thing they asked was about the OPEB, but maybe the first was, what's your fund balance policy? So it's very good to show that. And they like consistency and discipline. And so I see in a lot of your policies you have things going to certain stabilization funds, and they like to see that. But they also like to see your unreserved fund balance, your free cash, and your general fund being a big number, and then you're not spending it, because that shows that you have the discipline to wait and use it when you need it. And for them, you can't have enough reserves. I had a place that had their free cash was 25% of their, it was a small place, but it was 25% of their expenditures, but they used it all for a big project instead of borrowing. And they could have gone out and borrowed the money, and Moody's kind of like took a shot at them because they used their free cash. Now, they can build it back up again, but they liked it because it was there. They would have rather had them gone out and borrow more money, strange as it seems, and had those reserves on hand. So your financial statements paint you in a good financial position right now. On page, I think it's page 7, you have your free cash. It shows your free cash and the growth of your free cash over the last several years. And it also shows your unreserved fund balance above it, about a third of the way up, and it shows your total fund balances. But typically they look at your...
In this room, I think everybody does understand what free cash means, but it's such a unfortunately named item for the television audience.
It's not free and it's not cash.
Okay, good.
What it is it's really, in a commercial sense, it's your retained earnings. And you see, what they look at, your undesignated or unreserved fund balance, which in the commercial would be retained earnings, but then they back off certain things. If you have any deficits in any other funds, or if you have some overlay that's not, they subtract receivables and add back deferred revenue. So it's not exactly your unreserved fund balance, but if your unreserved fund balance is high, your free cash is probably going to be high. So yours has grown over the years, and it's a very healthy amount, and I'm sure that Moody will be happy with it. If one financial statement I would like to just show you is on page 47. It's your budget versus actual one, and this is the financial statement that is most close to the financial statements that you would get if you ran a budget.
47?
Yeah. If you got budget versus actual reports from the town, from Bonnie. And what it shows is what generates your free cash. It shows the original budget, the final budget, and the actual amounts. And as you can see, you generated, on the far right column, your revenues came in over budget by $955,000, and your expenditures came in under budget by a substantial amount too. So you generated about $2.3 million, the bottom right number, in free cash based on budget surpluses this year. And that's, as time goes on, I think that there was the big number was employee benefits that they appropriated significant, they were expecting a significant increase in benefits and didn't get it. Fortunately, was that the year that you got that 3%? Yeah. Yeah, so I think you were budgeting 10% and you got the 1.5%. So that.
A part of that was driven by the one-time adoption.
That's right, yeah. So that number won't happen again often. So what happens typically is to try to be conservative in your revenue estimates, because over time, as things get level funded, you close out less and less appropriation from the expenditures. You come in closer and closer to the budget on the expenditure side. So the longer you can stay low on your revenue estimates, that's what's going to generate your free cash as time goes on. In the back of the report, we have to give a report on the internal controls and compliance with laws and regulations, and there's a clean report on that. There's no findings for that. We also have to do a report on the internal controls and compliance with laws and regulations on federal grants, and there were no findings on that. There was a clean opinion on that.
That's worth taking a stop and noting, because I remember, not that we ever were a renegade town, but every year there always seemed to be a couple of compliance issues or whatever.
Yeah, there were some issues.
I thought I just couldn't find it in here, but
No.
it's not there, right?
No, actually for the last couple of years, you've been good on that. And they're getting more and more, especially since the ARA funds came in, they're getting more and more.
The what fund?
The ARA, the Recovery Act.
Oh, yeah.
That was federal grant funds, came in. They've been getting more and more technical on what they want you to adhere to on the grants, and you guys have done a good job. The schools have a lot of those federal grants, and they've done a good job with the intricacies of those requirements over the.
And that's worth noting too, that your audit is comprehensive not only of the municipal schools, but also includes the school.
And most of our audit grant testing relates to the school, because you have the larger, we have to test 50% of the expenditures, and you control the bulk of the federal grant expenditures, so.
Yeah, and they're all being administered.
Yeah, they're all being, no findings at all.
Do you test the student activity accounts?
No, we have not tested the student activity accounts.
Why is that?
Well, we test it just as it relates to a piece of the audit. If an expenditure comes up through the testing of our audit, but we haven't done a specific student activity audit, which is probably a good idea to do.
We had a huge problem with student activities in Wayland where I work, so
Really?
I ask.
Well, I know
We have
that,
none.
I know that Steve has set up
Those being monitored?
Absolutely, every month.
I know that Steve has a pretty slick
Right,
spreadsheet
right,
set up
every
for that.
month.
It's not Wayland.
You're not paying like guidance people or anything, any sort of salaries out of those accounts? That was one of the things we had. We're testing proctors, we're getting paid, people were doing SATs, PSATs, you're all getting paid. Field trips, people are taking field trips to Washington DC.
Bonnie monitors
So,
the expenses that are paid out of it. We reconcile the cash.
You know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't say this lightly. Your finance team is the best finance team that I have of all my clients. I mean, and I don't just mean one person.
Selectmen and the town administrator who were all invited to be here, to hear this. We appreciate the school committee, who were great partners this year.
But I don't just mean like one person. And a lot of times I do, there's like one or two people that carry the ball. But Bonnie and Steve and Ken and Becky, that's as strong a finance team that of any place I go. They're all professionals in their job. So you guys are lucky to have that group. So, and I don't say this at all my exit conferences.
Well, Rich Ricky said, luck is the residue of hard work. Right? You're welcome to use that, BJ. Couple of other points I might point. Is there anything else you want to highlight?
I just opened it up.
Following up on what Chris said, I don't know, in truth, you do a full audit. A full audit doesn't audit everything.
No, we do things on a test basis. What we do is we test the internal controls over your payroll, your expenditures, the receipts, to an extent that we think that we can rely on your systems of internal control. So we do a random sample test of 40 items of certain expenditures. We test a certain number of payroll items, at least 40 payroll items, but we do them randomly. We have a random table chart that we use, and we select, so that every item has an equal opportunity of being selected. And certain things we test all your IRS forms to make sure they tie in to your payrolls that you have, and so, but everything is done on a test basis.
One issue that we've had a discussion on, it occurs in a couple of different departments, and since it's been during this year, and your last audit was for the year that ended last June 30th, right, is the revolving funds. Has Bonnie spoken with you about that specifically? I mean, some of the, I know the Park Rec community had is funded largely with revolving funds.
Yeah.
Different departments have use of it, and I think there's one area where we're both looking toward having, you know, maybe a more specific policy on use on that. And I don't know if there's, you know, accounting, and obviously nothing bubbled up there.
As far as the type of expenditures allowed?
Yeah, and controls.
Well, we were talking about, you know, setting up, making a revolve.
And part of it came to light just to, you know, to get it out on the table on an issue that had occurred years ago under prior folks, and there's no even evidence that anything, nobody did anything wrong, except there was a great level of confusion created on I think it was credit card, remember the issue? Yeah, credit card receipts and
For the record.
lost revenue and that kind of thing. It was just the way it was accounted for, and this was in, you know, a revolving fund managed by.
Yeah, no, I remember that. I mean, like, what happened is like that the credit cards stopped making deposits
Right.
at some point in time, yeah. So, I mean, we didn't do specific testing for that credit cards this year, so I know that when that happened, we did a lot of research, we did a lot of background checking on that too. But I can't say that we tested that specific thing this
But
year.
if you begin next year's, you know, audit after July 1st, if there are a couple of target areas we wanted to look
Absolutely.
at, like revolving funds, if we asked you to pay
Yep.
particular attention there.
Yeah, I usually do, I talk to Bonnie, I say, Bonnie, is there anything that, you know, you want us to look at this year? So I'll put that down right now and make sure we look at that.
I know, I think, I speak for everybody, that's one that we definitely wanted to.
The receipts, the cash receipts on it?
I don't know specifically, there was an issue in that, but I guess that's inherent to the.
Cash.
Yeah, cash.
Credit card is what it was, that was the
Yeah.
problem. But back then, I mean, again, that was several
Well,
years ago.
part of it
now,
was
but-
even just the fluctuations
Just the
on it,
fluctuations.
because we partially fund one of the departments by
Mhm.
both their own revolving fund plus our town appropriation, and, you know, we want to make sure we have controls and can properly plan.
All right, well, I'll talk to Bonnie before I start the next audit.
Similarly, maybe, I was looking kind of for experience on the implementation of the charter accounts, but, you know, as good as things look when you review of the school accounts, we now have actually better
Right.
financial communication on, since July 1st.
Well, there wasn't, I mean, as far as financial reporting for the financial statements, we don't look at it at the detailed level, the chart of accounts worked okay for us, for our audit.
Because you're looking at the end product
Right,
anyway,
and
right?
we took everything and funneled it down into an education number instead of, so, I mean, it just means more accounts, but for an internal review purposes, it's a very slick chart of accounts that you have now, because you can hone into every single grant and tell what was
Real time.
tuition, yeah, you can tell, and you can tell more detail by grant. So right now, when you set up a grant, I think that Lonnie has it set up, so every new grant, it's already set up, and she just has like 50 different types of expenditure accounts in there, and she just calls out the ones that they're not gonna use, and so that you have much more detail for your types of expenditures that you are having.
Yeah, and then that was essentially, that was all fully integrated by what, late summer, early fall? Does that sound right? Either of you guys remember?
It went into effect for this. fiscal
July
year.
1st, I believe.
Okay, but it took a little while, did it, to bring the
Charter
schools
accounts have
completely
to be
in?
brought up.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
went over a little into this year, but it was backtracked.
Yeah, I think what happened is they had a few warrants go into the old accounts, but then they made journal entries to back them out of those accounts and into the new accounts. So if you run reports now, as of July 1st, then it's, you can get them in all that detail that.
Kelly or Steve have anything to add to your knowledge on that whole subject, the implementation of the integration rather of the schools into the charter accounts, and other than a little browsing maybe? But
No, it's
initially?
going well. In fact,
Yeah.
Kelly's happy, because certainly, he was very active in working with you all to do
Yeah.
this. No, I'd say, Kelly and Steve both plenty happy.
Yeah, okay.
You know,
That's our impression, I was just want to confirm it.
I can tell you that it's gonna help them when they do their end-of-year report that they do for the Department of DESE. Because before, they had to take certain accounts and say, okay, that one's special education, okay, this one's regular grants. And say, take each account, it's gotta break it out, and say, what some teachers are charged for this grant, and it's, you know.
And our superintendent's still somewhat new, going into well, he's in a second year now. So entering the district, he had these thoughts and then working and then working with everybody. So he's in the direction you're all recommending.
Yeah.
I think we're there now.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
there.
no,
It
yeah,
actually
yeah.
was very smooth.
Yeah, so I mean, you can get a lot more detail out of the expenditure report.
It ought to make Steve's life easier this time around, too.
Yeah,
And that was Kelly's point. Kelly's our superintendent.
yeah, yeah.
Kelly Grunch.
Yeah.
All right. My other point, and I'll let other members jump in, and this is more on a scheduling thing, Dick, I go back to an earlier point in time where, I mean, you have your audit, the numbers of it done essentially sometime over the summer, early fall, is that right?
Well, this year we were a little late, we didn't finish it until, we didn't finish until March this year.
Right.
Normally, we get it done earlier, the last couple of years, there's been some backtracking on it, but.
And I'm, you know, like, my memory goes back to an earlier day.
Yeah, we
I
always-
remember, yeah, on the selectmen, it was getting the presentation of the FinCom in, and I don't know if we had the schools involved in it or not, we should have. Maybe we had a presentation, probably October, maybe November,
Yeah.
when we were beginning the budget year, to integrate any changes we need to make.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, the good news is, there wasn't anything out of your report that suggested changes, but I wonder, is there more value for the town in having that information earlier?
I mean, if you're ready to come in, for us to come in, we can come in earlier, yeah,
Okay.
so if that's what Bonnie would like, and, you know, you guys would like. And
Yeah. Well, we'll talk with those
Yeah.
folks. And well, they were invited here, maybe the way to get the selectmen to hear this information is to have it at their meeting and we'll come visit. Which we're happy to do, we've done that, yeah, okay. Any other questions from the audit? You had a chance to look it over?
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There are members missing before, I'm gonna cut you off just here before I forget. We'll probably chew some of this over a little bit more, and maybe before you start July 1st, we'll have some follow-up conversation with Bonnie.
Sure.
You know, if there are pointers, things we want you to look at.
Sure, no problem.
I see we do the compliance supplement as well,
Pardon me?
the compliance supplement
Yeah.
at the end of the year report.
Yep. So,
Interested to see that at some point. That's always a good little audit to see.
yeah. Do you do it over in Wayland?
Yeah, I do, yeah. Well, I do the end of the year report for Wayland, so
Yeah.
I work with the auditors on the compliance supplement, so. Recommend that.
So do we get a discount since we have such a good finance team? Your job's so much easier?
I think you do.
Okay.
No, we just charge more for the tougher
The
ones.
gift just keeps on giving, huh?
Any other questions? For the record, and this is for the record now, we have not only Harmony and earliest budget in memory with the schools, the finance committee, and the selectmen all on the same page. We just got a glowing report from the auditor, and we had a seamless transition of the implementation of chart of accounts. So I'd say the relationship with you folks is going great, and
I told you it'd work if you do what we wanted.
whatever worked, PJ, has worked, and let's just keep it going. It's great, so we appreciate it.
And you want-
And you know, just your showing up here, this level of interest, you know, that says something.
Yeah, in quite the serious tone, we are happy with you all. You know, I think the working relationship, you and the Board of Selectmen, it worked out, the whole finance team.
Yeah.
In fact, come to Rotary, because we actually stole your virtues there at Rotary.
Yeah. This is good for all concerned, right? That's right. All right, we do have other items. Thank you both for coming.
Thank
We
you
appreciate
very
it very
much.
much. The education, the good news.
Bad news, good news.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Pleasant evening.
Bonnie's not here, so I assume there's no further finance director's report.
Who's Jack is up here? Is that Bonnie's?
Oh.
Steve's.
Oh, it's Steve's. Okay. No, so he's not leaving, he's just taking over. He's glad having everybody. Okay, good.
All right, before I forget, I got this is, if you remember our last meeting, Henry Crystal was one of our attendees
Yeah, we
here.
got one of those letters too.
Oh, you did get him?
Yeah, I think we all got a letter.
Yeah, we all got it.
Oh, all right, because he mailed it to me, and I got, I have a P.O. box.
About
The sewer stuff. All
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
well, I
yeah,
promised
yeah,
I'd
okay.
distribute it, but I'm glad to hear you got it, because
Yeah.
he didn't apparently have my email. I said, you'd make it a lot easier if you got my email. I got it the day after we met, naturally, because he mailed it to my
Yeah,
street address, the post office.
All for naught, because it
Right.
didn't go anywhere anyway.
All right. Then fine, in the future, hopefully, I encourage him to stay in touch with us, but maybe he'll send it by email and we'll get it.
Oh, so that's the guy, I didn't put that together, though. He was the guy, he's
Yeah.
sitting on FinCom, who's now on the sewer committee. That's the
No,
connection? No.
Henry was one of the residents who had, had some concerns with the sewer.
Oh, and he was here, okay.
Right,
Oh,
right.
okay,
There was
okay,
two of
okay.
them back there, Tom
Okay.
Coughlin. and
Oh,
Henry
yeah,
Preston.
I know that, okay.
Yeah, so.
Tom, he was there with Tom. right.
Yeah. All right, now I'll just throw out what I had thoughts on the budget presentation, and particularly, Alan, I hope you would have some suggestions to take full advantage of our wonderful world of Littleton cable television, is, to do what we kind of started last year. Well, I mean, it's just a continuation in some forms, but each member takes a chunk of what we want to report, and then prepares a slide for a PowerPoint, and if we want to graph up, to the extent that your topic covers it, and then whoever's there, I don't know if Fred's going to be back on the 30th or not, we just use our meeting then essentially to be doing a broadcast version of our report, and make the PowerPoint also available, which should be just kind of a simplified version of some of the other financial reports we had. The obvious topics would be an intro, much like the one for the town meeting report that's being mailed out, on some of the changes in process, which I'd be happy to tackle as chairman of the intro. Somebody ought to speak to the actual, budget, proposed budget in terms of its highlights and in terms of, changes from the prior year. And then somebody ought to be talking about some of the other bigger picture financial issues, such as long-term debt picture, capital program or whatever. In light of tonight's discussion, somebody ought to handle, I would think, specifically OPEB, and kind of introduce the town to that whole subject. And those are the obvious things that come to mind. The warrant articles too, I guess, is whether we do that with the budget or.
Do we have, when we have that warrant articles that we
Well,
talked
the
about?
Article 4,
Yeah, well, Article 4 of the
Yeah,
budget.
but any debt? No, so, no capital? Well,
Just capital.
we could just mention the
No
amount of the capital.
overrides.
Yeah, we could just say what we're supporting that's been proposed, explain it to the extent you think it needs explaining. My question is whether that should be done separate from the budget piece, or just
yeah,
inclusive.
I don't see that in the budget
Yeah.
piece.
Yeah. So, does anyone have any other? Huh?
We go pick something, is that?
Well,
what
we,
we
that,
did
or
last year?
have I missed anything, or something, well, I'd like to talk about X, go right ahead. I mean, we're free to, do what we want.
I guess I'll pick the budget one, with the changes in the budget, so
Sure.
should be looking at what the town increase or the school increase, that sort of stuff. Any
Yeah,
changes
the
in-
highlights, the
any highlights
changes,
of the
and especially, I guess, some of the, the new things that are in there, which would be like the fire department, or.
Yeah, right,
the
their increase, right.
wage, you can look right at the report
Yeah.
that we did last week to get
All
it.
right, so.
There aren't a lot-
I'll do the capital budget,
Okay, and
And also
long-term
mention-
debt, that kind of stuff.
and also mention the new capital budget.
Oh, yeah, the stabilization fund,
Stabilization.
actually. Yeah.
Yep,
Do you want to handle
I
OPEB?
guess I will.
Well, there's always Fred and Peter and Brian. I'm gonna have to find something for Brian. Maybe I'll split up with Brian on some of the, we can just split the process topics and the subcommittee. We get some of the topics that we're looking at for financial policy subcommittee. We've done nothing more than launch it so far, but we can at least explain where the town has financial policies and where we're considering adding them.
So is this like an hour, are you thinking, a half an hour, the whole thing? What?
Under an hour, I would hope.
Under an hour, I would hope so too, that's what I'm thinking.
Usually, we do it
Couple
in
minutes,
half an hour.
yeah.
Half an
Yeah.
hour, I would think that would be good.
25 minutes.
Yeah,
I'll
so,
lose people with longer than that, I would
We
think.
need to get the slides together and
Yeah.
give
Yeah.
them to Mark and the studios,
Right.
so that they don't have to try to focus in on the whiteboard back here, but they can put the slides up as we.
right. Now, I'm thinking in terms of just logistics and time, is if we tell them the broadcast will be at 8 on the 30th, we can get together at the 7th and do a
Get
dry
prepared,
run
yeah.
through and on like that. And everybody can develop their topics in the meantime, so we can circulate them
Mhm.
amongst ourselves and with, Mark, so we can get it in a good, good form so that we
Final
can.
draft.
Yeah, final draft. Practice your own length, and then we can take it from there.
Hopefully we can get to the PowerPoint, because we didn't get to the PowerPoint stuff last year.
I know, that was
They were all scrambling with notes, oh, okay, there's no PowerPoint.
Yeah. I just think the whole new studio setup is gonna make that happening. We get it to Mark, he can put it up on the screen, right? We don't have to be showing,
Easier to talk to bullets than it is to
Right.
read off a piece of paper.
but rather than having the audience having to squint and look at what's
Yeah.
brought, shown
Yeah,
there, well, they'll be
definitely.
looking at it right at the, so we'll have to do a little coordination. Now, will you talk to Mark about what we're trying to do that?
Yep, you want, in the past, we've done it at 7:30 as opposed to 7 o'clock, and we meet
Okay.
at 7 to go through it. But this is a different way of doing things, so maybe you do need an hour's time to, but we can't be changing the slides at that point.
No,
It's just
we
how
gotta try to, if we're not, if we're gonna, and I'm gonna suggest we axe next Tuesday's meeting, as long as everybody's, a good doobie and does their little work and we can circulate things. I think feel comfortable under the open meeting law that we're not deliberating anything, we're just exchanging information that we're gonna be presenting on the,
Right, because we're not meeting next Tuesday.
well, we were scheduled to,
Right.
so I'm gonna get rid of that,
Right.
as long as if everybody feels comfortable that we can,
Yeah, get organized before that, right.
And I'll establish whether Fred's gonna be back and figure out what piece Brian wants to do. Maybe he does a conclusion type thing. I'll do an opening, he does a conclusion. You handle the budget, you're gonna handle the debt and the stabilization. You're gonna try to make this, by the way, I didn't know we were gonna get an hour and a half presentation.
It's a lot of stuff to talk about.
I didn't wanna discourage her, man. She probably goes through life having people, telling her to shorten her presentation, but it was good.
It's a lot to cover, I don't know how she, a lot to explain, but.
Anyway, is there anything else we should be talking about?
We're
Are we missing anything obvious? Kind of a quiet year, isn't it?
It's a good thing.
There was.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna, the 30th.
Oh, you know what I always harp on? It's the whole revenue picture, which we never talk about. Maybe I'll talk with Brian about that, We always talk about the expenditure side of the ledger book, and we never talk much about the revenue part.
Well, we always put up revenue numbers, but anyway, 30 April, 8 PM.
8 PM for
8
the
PM
broadcast.
for the television, so,
Right.
but we're gonna meet at 7.
We'll post at 7.
Okay.
Okay.
And you are canceling next week's meeting?
Yes, I'm going to cancel next week's meeting. I will let Jennifer and Diane and Bonnie know.
So how does this work? If we're posted for 7, but it won't be televised between
Well,
7 and
they
8?
can, I mean, they can,
Otherwise, they're
they-
gonna show it once and then show it, and then show with all our, that's kind of weird, though,
it's an
huh?
open meeting.
Yeah, I
We can
guess
throw the
that's true.
switch, but
Right, just gonna flip the switch on, talk for a half
Yes.
hour, and the meeting's over.
No, the meeting,
No,
you
no,
post
no.
the meeting for 8 o'clock.
That's
I
what confused me.
wasn't thinking of doing that, because if we're all going to be meeting here working on it, we probably should be posted.
But
as
we
a-
don't have
as
to
a
be
work
televised,
session.
though, right?
This
Right.
is a
Yeah,
work
yeah,
session,
no.
it's not a
Yeah.
meeting session.
But I think to cover, I'll ask Diane on that, but I think we probably should be posted at 7, just make it clear to the TV people, we're doing a work session, which is open to the public and it's subject to the open meeting law, but the broadcast portion is what, yeah.
You'd have to post.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. I just don't, it just would be
Okay.
silly to put it on television and then have the dry run on
Yeah.
television and
Yeah.
then turn
Yeah,
around.
televised.
That would be silly.
Right. I mean, we had a bunch of meetings that weren't televised anyways, we
Right.
just tell them this is the one that probably ought not to be televised, the 7 to 8 portion.
Right,
Well, we control when the switch gets thrown, so.
Yeah.
well,
Yeah, but when you
the
do
with the
the,
audio.
you do your
Oh,
dance
yeah.
without the audio.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Marilyn brings up a good point. Well, not only that, I don't know if we run afoul of it, that's the primary, right?
Primary, yeah.
What's
Yeah,
this?
It's
The
the
30th is
special
the
primary. I don't know, I think we're locked in.
Yeah, they can watch it at any.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
No one's gonna sit
rebroadcast.
there at 8
Yeah,
o'clock.
Well,
waiting.
I'm glad you
I
brought
just
that up, yeah.
Thought I would mention it.
Yeah. I don't know if that poses a big conflict for anybody.
It's gonna be retelevised, obviously, right?
You would hear it all night long.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
just make sure you go vote before 7 o'clock.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Not that there's gonna be a big turnout anyways, but,
No, I think.
so.
Okay, you've got all that down, the minutes there, Marilyn, so our assignments. I don't recall, I know we talked about minutes last week. Did we vote the set from 2 weeks ago that Marilyn had taken, or did we
We decided not to. I
decide to hold on to them? All
believe.
right.
So hold on to them.
Oh, I didn't bring it
I
up.
thought we were holding on to them
Yes,
because we didn't have everybody here.
I didn't have a copy, and number
And I
one.
didn't bring a copy tonight.
Okay. I think we did have some very basic discussion too, Marilyn. There seems to be different, well, I want people to speak for themselves, but I'll say my own piece. I'm happy with things being as long as you want, but I think there's more of a general desire to have things a little more concretely defined. Is that fair on the page?
Subject, yeah.
So if there's general topic areas, things should be broken out by their action area items should kind of jump off of it. And maybe we don't need as much of the,
That's fine with
you know,
me.
I don't want, I like a recreation of the dialogue to a certain extent, but for the people reviewing it, it probably ought to be pretty quick if they want to find.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Is that fair? Does that reflect?
Fair,
Like
yeah.
a hybrid from what I was doing, active minutes, and
Right, right.
what you were doing, kind of in the middle.
Well, I never saw yours,
Yeah,
so I
mine was
don't.
One page
My-
is
Yeah, my one-page active
yeah,
minutes.
action items, things
We
we
talked
things we voted
active
on.
We
minutes.
came, we saw, we conquered.
Yeah, that is it.
Oh,
They covered the law, but I think
Yeah,
we want a
that
little
was
more
spot
of
on.
that.
okay.
All right. So, okay, good. Anything else? That was-
So the only time that we're all gonna see what we're all gonna talk about is an hour before we talk about it on the 30th.
No, I'm gonna suggest by email that
Yeah, we
we,
should-
we submit it all, maybe, you know, to me as a central point, and I'll submit it all out. If we set a date
Exactly
certain
what I'm
on.
getting to.
Okay, so you have a suggestion to that?
No,
end? All right,
that was my suggestion,
all right.
that
How
people
about-
ought to be looking towards next Tuesday or
Next Tuesday
Wednesday.
draft day. Your
I'm
reward
having
for not having to come here is
a
that
draft.
our expectation is you draft by next Tuesday. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, good point, Alan. And I gotta sort out with Brian what he wants to do, because he'll wanna do something. He can either do the summary at the end, or he can cover some of the policies. We'll find something. He'll have something he wants to talk about, I'm sure.
All right, I'll take care of the television end of this.
Good. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
That we adjourn?
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded that that we adjourn. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. No, opposed? The ayes have it. FinCom adjourned. Oh, we have a high from Bonnie. Let's see if we see anything.